From this day forward, he officially steps into his new role as the court's blacksmith. Our protagonist has poured countless hours into his craft, driven by the singular goal of becoming the world's greatest blacksmith. The cherry blossoms had reached their peak, blanketing the area in full bloom. She appeared to acknowledge him, prompting him to resolve to do his absolute best to prove his worth. A girl approached him, inquiring in a melodic voice if he was a blacksmith. Observing her noble appearance, the hero confirmed he was indeed a blacksmith and questioned how she had managed to figure that out. She pointed out that his license was clearly visible, poking out of his pocket. She was on the verge of falling out, narrowly avoiding the drop. The hero's ability to function depended entirely on her constant support. After expressing his gratitude, the girl dismissed the gesture, noting that he seemed far too young to be a blacksmith. Announcing that his duties were officially beginning that day, the man also admitted that he was operating under a false name. After the hero admitted he had been rehearsing and asked for her patience, the girl reassured him that he was doing well and complimented his kind nature. She introduced herself as Alicia. She confirmed her noble status, but told him there was no need to worry about formal etiquette. She explained that she was meant to be at the ball, but she had fled to escape the overwhelming number of men competing for her attention. Alicia questioned him about his future goals, admitting that she remained uncertain of her own identity and was eager to discover what she truly wanted. Faye responded that his ultimate goal was to become the greatest blacksmith in the world. Recognizing the difficulty of the task ahead, he resolved to put in every ounce of effort. The girl expressed her firm belief in him, hoping he would one day become the greatest blacksmith in the world. The protagonist was caught off guard by her sudden and public display of support. Up until this point, he had only ever faced ridicule for it. Now serving at the royal court, he finds himself frequently crossing paths with many charming ladies. Perhaps he'll even find himself getting married one day. He chose to initiate the interaction with a simple greeting. Initial impressions carry an immense amount of weight. He offered a simple morning greeting. Without warning, the man ordered him to get straight to work. He ordered him to repair the sword, insisting that he remain until the task was fully complete. The hero's idealized vision of a vibrant life at court is now on the verge of falling apart. 3 years have passed since he first began his tenure as a court blacksmith. His primary duty centered on the repair and restoration of weaponry. Originally a humble village blacksmith, his extraordinary talents soon earned him a position at the royal court, where he eagerly worked to perfect his dream craft. However, reality proved to be quite different. As Morgan urged him to maintain his pace, the man offered an apology. Calling himself incompetent for the mistake, the man insisted on docking his own pay and refused to let the hero interject. The man didn't dare to speak up or voice any disagreement. While an order of this magnitude would typically require an entire blacksmith shop, the responsibility for all that ammunition fell solely on him. It appeared his current punishment was a direct consequence of his earlier encounter with that man. The man explained that he was only trying to offer some guidance. Though he had spent 3 years in that place, his perpetual anger remained, and he had long since grown accustomed to the physical pain. Their assessment was correct. He lacked the necessary skills for the workshop, and their frustration over his inadequacy led them to lash out at him physically. Ultimately, he had no one to blame but himself for his poor salary and the complete lack of time off. After being questioned about his recent conduct, the young man was dismissed to ensure all the weapons would be completed before the holidays ended. He signaled his understanding, but the man reminded him of their invitation to the upcoming ball, insisting the hero fulfill his responsibilities without slacking off. One of the attendees pointed out that the guests from the neighboring state hadn't visited the girl in some time, despite being expected at the feast to pay their respects to her properly. Faye was buried under a massive workload, and failing to finish by the end of the week would mean being forced into night shifts. Although the next 2 days were supposed to be his weekend off, he first needed to finish the weapon for the nights, forcing his rest to wait a bit longer. Finishing by Monday would only lead straight into a new work week without any rest, leaving him to regret the inefficiency that caused him to fall behind in the first place. These blacksmiths are tasked with 2 primary responsibilities: forging weapons and casting spells. These enchantments enhance a blade's sharpness and durability, effectively making it rust-proof and maintenance-free for about a week. Because the magic is temporary, the blacksmith shop is flooded with a massive influx of weapons every 7 days. Mastering enchantment is a straightforward process that begins with reviewing the weapon's magic code through a specialized interface. Once all the necessary information is displayed, magic power is used to finalize the corrections. The process of enchantment is achieved by either modifying existing magical symbols or introducing new ones. Neglecting the weapon or handling it recklessly causes the symbols to fade over time. If the sword's enchantment remains intact, the markings only need to be upgraded. But should they vanish entirely, they must be reapplied from scratch. Enveloped in a pleasant aroma and a soft, warm sensation, the hero felt a sense of comfort. though he was surprised to realize he had actually fallen asleep. This approach ensures he won't have enough time to complete his task. The girl voiced her discomfort, catching the man completely off guard by her sudden appearance. He began offering her a series of apologies, one after another. Her fascination with blacksmithing was evident, as she sought him out every time she received an invitation to a ball. The previous day, Mr. Morgan conferred with the others regarding Lady Alicia's invitation. The impostor hadn't even bathed or changed out of his work uniform, prompting the girl to ask what had happened and warn him that sleeping there would cause him to catch a cold. With the ball concluded, the hero insisted he was doing well, likely because the girl had stayed the night and decided to check on him before her departure. He was supposed to have finished his work the day before, and although his memory of the events was hazy, it seemed he had completed every task. Alicia noticed how pale he looked and immediately began to express her concern for his health. Despite being slapped by Mr. Morgan the day before, he typically showed no visible signs of bruising. Still irritated by his behavior from the previous day, it was clear that only trouble awaited him now. Despite knowing their difference in social status made a future together impossible, he couldn't help his feelings for Alicia. He realized that she would likely always be out of reach regardless of his efforts, yet he still yearned to appear respectable in her eyes. Refusing to be seen as pathetic, he was determined to leave her with a dignified impression of him as a man. Noticing his pain, the girl apologized for not having any healing ointment, but the hero told her not to worry, explaining that he was so overwhelmed with work he didn't even have time to offer her tea. Assuring him there was no need for concern, she asked to observe his progress, a request the protagonist readily accepted. As they realized someone was missing, the engravings on one of the swords suddenly faded away. She expressed her agreement, noting how his work reflected both remarkable skill and meticulous care. Surveying the vast collection of weaponry, she inquired if he had personally enchanted every item himself. She noted the difficulty of his work and asked if all blacksmiths faced such conditions, but the hero admitted he was still only at the lowest level. If he failed to handle even this situation, his goal of becoming a more capable master would be entirely out of reach. Alicia admitted she hadn't realized how grueling a blacksmith's journey could be, noting that his dedication deserved the same level of respect as a court armorer. He downplayed the situation, claiming there was nothing remarkable about his actions since he still lacked sufficient experience. The girl praised his independence, noting how impressive it was that he could accomplish so much on his own. To everyone around him, he was simply regarded as incompetent. She pressed him to reveal what was weighing on his mind, insisting he wouldn't be leaving until he opened up. Despite feeling ashamed, he decided to open up and tell her about the incident. He found himself unable to stop, having kept the situation a secret from everyone until that moment. Realizing she was the Duke's daughter, he began to question if his conduct in her presence was appropriate. Insisting it was his own fault, he argued that his lack of talent justified their harsh training, but she immediately dismissed his excuses as nonsense. Alicia expressed regret for not asking sooner, while the hero apologized, feeling he had shared too much. As his tears began to flow once more, he tried to hide his face, ashamed to let her see him in such a vulnerable state. A man suddenly barged into the room, insulting his abilities and demanding that he immediately enchant his sword. One of the knights appeared, clearly taken aback to find the Duchess there. Under normal circumstances, the hero would have already been met with a hail of fists. But thanks to the girl's intervention, things played out differently this time. He was tasked with imbuing the sword with a magical enchantment. The sword had clearly been handled with total recklessness. Despite the enchantment being cast only days ago, it was already on the verge of shattering. The hero warned the knight to be more cautious, as the spell's integrity was now severely compromised. The man explained that these burdens were forced upon them by someone completely incompetent. The impostor explained that although his spells were quite potent, the low-grade materials used to forge the standard knight swords were simply insufficient. The potential of these charts is strictly limited, as losing one's composure during battle will cause the magical structure to collapse. Fortunately, the restoration is now complete. The sword was now in peak condition and ready for action. He invited Alicia to the boardwalk, offering to show her around, but she politely declined and wished him the best. She asked if he frequently dealt with such behavior, while he silently lamented his inability to maintain any sense of dignity in front of the girl he liked. Alicia cautioned him against pushing himself too far, warning that his constant overexertion would eventually take a toll on his health. The protagonist felt that if he couldn't survive the demands of his position at court, he wouldn't be able to succeed in any other profession. If he doesn't comply, his license will be revoked, though he has actually tried to walk away before. After a year on the job, he admitted to Mr. Morgan that he could no longer handle the work, and requested to be dismissed. He threatened to revoke the hero's blacksmithing license if he chose to leave, a move that would legally bar him from his trade. Even if he attempted to work in secret, any discovery would result in his arrest for operating without a permit. She explained that her true reason for visiting was to present him with an offer. She caught him off guard by asking for his hand in marriage. The protagonist initially doubted she was suggesting they live together as a couple, but she soon confirmed that was exactly what she meant. She insisted that there was no hidden intent behind her actions. Despite being pursued by numerous suitors, she had no intention of marrying any of them and turned to him to act as her cover. Having taken up her father's trade as a blacksmith, she believed she had enough common ground to finally convince him. Born into a lineage of blacksmiths, her family was elevated to the aristocracy after their ancestors gifted the king a sword that is now a national treasure, a status her father has worked tirelessly to maintain. When the hero questioned his involvement, she explained that her lineage must always include a blacksmith born with an innate talent for the craft. This implied that bloodline wasn't the deciding factor. As long as his innate talent could be inherited, he was free to marry anyone he chose, prompting the girl to ask him to become her fiancé. Exhausted by the unwanted attention from numerous suitors, she explained that she only wished to marry for true love and asked her fiancé to serve as a necessary deterrent to keep others away. Furthermore, she promised that if he accompanied her to her homeland, she would secure a new license for him to prevent any further mistreatment, making the deal mutually beneficial. Admitting to his lack of talent, the hero expressed his fear that he wouldn't be able to help her at all. She dismissed the claim, explaining that after watching him at the forge, she had always considered him the most talented blacksmith of them all. She explained that her admiration for him wasn't based on talent alone, but rather the relentless hard work and dedication he consistently displayed. He fought the urge to view her in that light, knowing he was dangerously close to misreading the entire situation. He asked for her input on how she believed the situation should be handled. She decided that playing the part of a fake bride was far better than being forced to marry a complete stranger. The hero found her bluntness baffling, feeling increasingly thrown off by her words. In reality, the entire situation was merely a facade. Although she didn't truly desire a romantic relationship, she felt pity for the man's desperate situation and chose to take him in. Even if they never actually marry, he could still find a sense of belonging working as her blacksmith, so he agreed to become her fiancé as long as she was certain of her choice. Alicia mentioned that another ball would be held that day, followed by a visit to her residence, so the hero acknowledged the plan and asked for their departure time to ensure he was ready. Uncertain if he could depart so easily, he recalled the requirement to provide a 2-week notice period before his exit could be finalized. Previously, bringing this up resulted in a severe beating, but now that he has a girlfriend by his side, they're confident they can find a solution together. She asked him to stop using formal titles, explaining that since they were now engaged, social status no longer mattered and they should speak to each other as equals. The protagonist candidly admitted he had reached his limit and wished to resign on his own terms. Infuriated, the man claimed he had poured a significant amount of work into the main character. The men reminded him of the extensive effort they had put into teaching him etiquette, cruelly claiming that no one else would want him and that he had nowhere left to go. In the past, he would have remained silent without a second thought, but his promise to Alicia meant he could no longer afford to back down. Feeling unable to keep up with the workload, the young man asked to resign, prompting the blacksmith to inquire about his future plans and whether he had another job lined up. The man spoke up, requesting to see his license. He ruthlessly tore into her, declaring that the man was no longer a blacksmith and was effectively banned from working within the country. They informed him that restoring his certificate was entirely within their control, demanding he stay and work for them if he ever wanted it back. However, having grown weary of the nation, the hero realized that an identity card was worthless in a place he no longer cared for. The blacksmith explained that by fulfilling his duties for 1 more year, he would earn a promotion and the opportunity to hire a new assistant. The protagonist firmly stated that he would no longer be working under him. The man admitted he was out of options, realizing that persisting with his illegal activities would inevitably lead to his arrest. Another man taunted him, claiming that leaving would leave him utterly alone since no one else would tolerate his mediocrity, and predicted that he would eventually come crawling back to work for them. One of the staff members remarked that since he was on the verge of joining the union, they weren't about to let anyone take him. He braced himself for the inevitable, certain that he would lose his foot regardless of the cost. The hero was unsure if she had overheard the conversation, fearing that poor soundproofing might have revealed everything he wanted to keep hidden. The man noted how long it had been since they last met, remarking that she grew more charming with every passing day. She was curious to know if the imposter had actually been dismissed. The blacksmith remarked that providing the best possible conditions was ultimately pointless, as the man had squandered his opportunities and failed to learn a single lesson. The girl informed him that he had officially secured a position at her estate. The man admitted he lacked the skill to forge a proper sword or cast even a basic spell, but Alicia, sensing his hidden talent, offered to take him with her. The young woman admitted that she had developed an interest in the blacksmith. While she views their engagement as nothing more than a pretense, the protagonist finds himself falling deeper in love with her every day. With her by his side, he made his departure from the empire. He set off toward the south, making his way to the kingdom. Upon reaching the family compound, they would find her father already waiting for them. After a full day of travel, they finally reached their destination. The hero brushed off his fatigue, asserting that his exhaustion was of no consequence. He labored tirelessly in the forge, working without a single break from sunrise to sunset. She explained that her father had already been notified and was likely waiting for them, a revelation that left the young man feeling deeply uneasy. The impostor apologized to her, explaining that his actions had simply seemed like the most logical choice. He offered an apology for his intrusion, confessing that the engagement was a complete fabrication and acknowledging that he had overstepped his bounds. She reassured him that although he had caught her off guard, it wasn't a problem, and he shouldn't worry. The protagonist then questioned if their actions would appear more authentic if they chose to improvise instead. Despite being told how the situation would unfold, the hero decided they would simply improvise. Claiming he possessed a one-in-a-million talent, she urged her father to observe the way he cast his spells. The man requested a demonstration on the enchantment process and asked for the sword's current magical properties to be upgraded. The blade was inscribed with numerous magical symbols, yet these charms were mediocre compared to the ones he had previously restored at court. Based on its quality, he concluded the weapon likely belonged to a high-ranking official, such as a knight captain. He marveled at the intricate inlays and lettering, noting that the craftsmanship was far superior to anything he had ever seen. The man set a one-week deadline for himself, asserting that if he couldn't resolve the situation by then, he didn't deserve to be there. He assured them that the task would be completed quickly. Since several symbols remain intact, the task ahead is relatively straightforward. Only a few pieces were damaged, leaving him to wonder if he needed to place the correct characters into the remaining gaps. By analyzing the signs at both the beginning and the end, he slowly began to grasp the true nature of the enchantment. The protagonist noted that while replicating the enchantment perfectly was a challenge, his version achieved a nearly identical result. Stunned by the display, the man struggled to accept that the hero possessed such incredible talent. The young man took a moment to express his gratitude. The blacksmith made it clear that he wasn't yet prepared to accept the man as his daughter's future husband. Initially, his abrasive demeanor seemed like a facade, but he soon realized he had been mistaken. After he promised to work hard, the man provided him with a private workshop inside the mansion, now fully at his disposal. He granted him full access to the necessary materials and promised to manage the supplies, while also securing a new license for him with a stern reminder not to lose it again. Now granted the freedom to act as he pleases, the protagonist can finally choose exactly where to apply his skills as a blacksmith. Having spent his life forced to cast spells, he was finally granted the freedom to work with metal, leaving the hero both stunned and deeply appreciative. He explained that several knights required his assistance and, after instructing the staff to help with any needs, noted that he would be away on business for some time. Before heading out, the man strictly warned him to stay away from his daughter. The girl felt relieved to have finally reached her father, and while Fakes admitted he hadn't fully processed the situation, he was willing to try and make it work. Alicia noted that this was the first time he had ever offered such high praise, which she took as a promising sign. Feeling a deep sense of gratitude toward the girl, the hero hoped he could find a way to repay her kindness. A maid stood before him, introducing herself and offering to guide him through the proper etiquette. A blacksmith shop had been established at that location, commissioned specifically for Lady Alicia's fiancé. Most blacksmith workshops follow a standard layout, but this one notably featured a traditional forge. It had been a long time since he'd seen such a setup, as modern craftsmanship typically relies on magic, leaving physical tools like these largely forgotten. He appreciated the chance to use them from time to time, and though the girl offered to assist with any further needs, he thanked her and confirmed he already had all the necessary materials. Leafy then offered to personally guide him to his room. After showing him where he would be staying, she reminded him to reach out if he needed anything, to which the hero expressed his gratitude for the thorough tour and promised to let her know if he required further assistance. He felt as though his circumstances were finally starting to improve. Up until recently, he had been working under harsh conditions that constantly threatened to jeopardize his health. He now had a kind and wonderful girl by his side as his fiancée, and even though the arrangement was fake, he couldn't have asked for a better situation. Most importantly, he had finally attained a sense of true freedom. With his morning tasks already finished, he no longer has to stress about work, finally allowing him to get some proper sleep and enjoy the freedom of taking time off every day. This level of force was already excessive, as it would not only make the battle more difficult, but also leave a lasting stain on his reputation. With no responsibilities demanding his attention, he found himself with plenty of free time. With his duties beginning tomorrow, He's finally free to manage his own time. A massive change from his past, where he was mistreated for every move he made. He now hopes that every day will be just as fulfilling as this one. The maid confirmed that the man had been safely settled into his assigned quarters, prompting the heroine to thank her for the diligent work. She remarked that the outcome had actually exceeded her initial expectations. Leafy inquired about the expected timeline for the news. Though she was completely bewildered, she had left her home that day with the clear intention of asking him to be her husband. The girl corrected the misunderstanding with a sense of regret, explaining that she had actually been trying to propose to him. Despite the lack of a genuine bond, they had already discussed marriage, making the arrangement feel acceptable. She remained unexpectedly calm about the sudden wedding, though a lingering sense of awkwardness remained after everything they had experienced. The maid inquired whether a date for the wedding had been finalized. She finally realized that the heroine's proposal to her fiancé was merely a distraction, while Alicia maintained that she had done everything in her power. She believed that if he had any real interest in her, he would be able to understand everything simply by observing her behavior. The maid remarked that it wasn't just noticeable, but blatantly obvious. Although she prided herself on her ability to keep secrets, the heroine was left feeling deeply mortified when her efforts fell short. Leafy maintained that the marriage was merely a cover story. But since she had already gone public with the news, wedding preparations had to begin immediately, even though her father had yet to give his blessing. To move forward, the protagonist must first demonstrate his craftsmanship and await the master's final evaluation of his skills. Agreeing with the maid's perspective, she acknowledged that her family's prestigious blacksmithing legacy meant she could only marry a man of exceptional talent. As the daughter of a noble household, she had always understood that her freedom and her heart were never truly hers to control. The maid believed she could finally marry the man she loved, but it appeared far too early for her to celebrate. He was questioned about the blacksmith's plans and whether a replacement would be hired, considering the impostor had yet to return, and he was far too conspicuous to pass as a typical apprentice. With the others in agreement, the blacksmith began inquiring about the specific house Alicia represented. Although the family was recognized only by their title, rumors suggested they occasionally handpicked the most skilled blacksmiths to marry their daughters. Historically, their family's legacy extended far beyond just blacksmithing. A single glance at the fraud is enough to reveal his total incompetence, making it clear that no one would ever hire him. Even when given a few simple tasks to perform, he proved incapable of even properly holding a hammer. He was certain the man would eventually be dismissed, believing that despite his current rebellion, the hero would inevitably come crawling back. Now, it was only a matter of seeing how much longer the family would tolerate him before finally casting him aside. The man assumed it would take a week at most, certain that with nowhere else to turn, they would eventually return to them. In this situation, he would face a full week's workload, on top of being reassigned everything he missed during his absence. With the next 2 weeks already planned out, there's no need to rush, as they'll have plenty of time before the protagonist returns from his well-deserved punishment. He realized that his first priority was to provide the knights with an explanation. The blacksmith predicted that it was only a matter of time before the hero recognized his own incompetence and returned to him like a wayward servant. Out of habit, the protagonist found himself awake once more before the first light of dawn. During his time at court, he consistently rose at dawn to handle his workload in solitude, often starting with unfinished tasks from the previous day. This became his daily reality, where his responsibilities, ranging from spellcasting to specialized orders, far exceeded the expectations of an ordinary blacksmith as he labored from sunrise until midnight in a relentless cycle. When he finally wakes up, he realizes that it is no longer the crack of dawn. After a long absence from the forge, he finally decided it was time to get back to work. The witches each possessed a truly striking appearance. Witch's ore is a specialized metal highly sensitive to magic, making it an essential resource for blacksmiths. As the only material capable of being enchanted, it is used to significantly enhance the overall strength of steel. Crucially, it was quite simple to obtain from the demons. Gathering iron requires a constant presence in the mines, moving from one depleted site to the next in order to either reach the witches or eliminate the demon. These demonic leather gloves are remarkably durable, capable of withstanding extreme heat with ease. Blacksmithing relies on the elements of fire, water, and earth, so the hero's first priority is to secure a source of fire. Witches are categorized into several distinct types within this world. While the rarest and highest quality items are disguised as Class C, the standard rankings follow a sequence from A through F. Classes F and E are the most frequently utilized, even if they aren't of the highest quality. Today, he opted for a simple exercise to test his skills. Rather than aiming to create the world's most powerful weapon, he decided that crafting a basic knife would be a sufficient start. With the ore glowing red hot, it was finally time to transfer it into the casting mold. The temperatures then intensified even further, marking a stark contrast to the traditional fire pits once used by blacksmiths, a method now considered entirely obsolete. With the material now soft and pliable, the hero uses his earth magic to shape it into a clay mold. He then proceeded to pour the molten metal into the mold. Water magic is then utilized to rapidly cool the mold. From within, a solid steel ingot is successfully extracted. By applying a small amount of heat, the material is softened just enough to be molded into its intended shape. The technique required listening closely to the metal's sound while repeatedly heating and cooling the steel. This refinement process enhances the metal's quality, and as the material improves, both its frequency and magical potential rise accordingly. With little time left to work on the blade today, he resolved to prepare his materials in advance next time, so he could finally tackle his many other ambitions. The structure had finally taken the shape he intended, and it was now time to begin working with the clay. This process cools the blade to enhance its structural integrity and magical potential. But before sanding can begin, the mana must be spread evenly across the entire surface. By applying cold water to the blade's edge, the intricate pattern is instantly revealed. The next step required utilizing wind magic to hone the blade's edge. With the surface now polished to a brilliant shine, the only thing left to do is apply the final enchantment. The main character made a knife and decided to try it out in action. The sharpness and weight were now perfectly balanced, though it took him 3 full hours to complete a task he hadn't performed in a long time. It seemed to be breakfast time, which he had completely forgotten about. Previously, due to the amount of work, he only had enough time for rare snacks right at the forge. Upon noticing the girl, he asked how long she had been standing there, and she revealed she had been waiting for about an hour. After the maid informed her that he was spending the day in the workshop, she headed there to find him. Clearly flustered, the heroine asked him to stop looking at her that way. Having failed once more, her piercing gaze forced him to realize she had been right all along. She maintained that as his fiancée, there was nothing wrong with the way they looked at each other, provided the timing was appropriate. He began to overthink, but reminding himself that he was only a fake fiancé, he decided to let it go. Meanwhile, the girl was simply feigning ignorance about the attention they were receiving. Despite traveling a long distance just to watch him work, she found him so absorbed in forging the knife that he hadn't even noticed her arrival, though she quickly reassured him that she was content simply observing his dedication. Alicia admired the knife's beauty and sharp edge, noting its impressive enchantments, while the hero admitted he had poured a lot of effort into its creation. Had he known she was watching, he would have pushed himself even harder to deliver a better performance with the time he had. He was taken aback by her skill with a sword, but she explained that she had studied the fundamentals of fencing primarily for self-protection. Admitting he was a bit distracted, the protagonist remarked on how beautiful she looked. He remarked that the sight was truly breathtaking. Despite their engagement being a complete sham, her performance is so convincing that he often finds himself questioning if her feelings might actually be real. Considering it from that perspective, he recalled hearing that almost any girl could maintain a convincing facade. She extended an invitation for him to join her for breakfast. Alicia questioned whether he had always been this skilled at casting spells. He explained that his heavy responsibilities required him to work with speed and precision, a skill he perfected over time that now allows him to cast spells with the same efficiency, thanks to that infernal money. It is for this reason that he finds her company so deeply comforting. Interestingly, he noticed the distinct scent of bread during his visit to the forge. The protagonist admitted it had been ages since he last saw such treats, leading the girl to ask if he'd be willing to share more about his history. Having spent so many nights working late, he rarely had time to eat during the day. Even when he did manage to grab lunch, he would work right through it, barely tasting a thing. He used to simply rush through his meals as a necessity, but now, sharing this breakfast with her feels like the best meal he's ever had, moving him to tears of pure happiness. After enjoying the delicious meal, the girl suggested they head to the city so she could show him around. Alicia explained that although she rarely makes connections in the city, her father's popularity at festivals means there's always a risk someone might recognize her. Her striking beauty draws far too much attention, making a quiet stroll through the city impossible if she were to be recognized. She remarked that their time together felt just like a date. He remarked that the situation certainly felt like a date, yet he remained puzzled by all the drama surrounding it. Since their engagement was only a pretense, he couldn't understand why she was putting so much effort into their relationship. He admitted his belief that finding success as a blacksmith and gaining her father's approval would have been enough. The hero suggested a fake engagement to save her from marrying a stranger, acting as a mere cover so she wouldn't even need to pretend they were dating. The maid explained that the blacksmith hoped the girl would marry a talented craftsman, seeking to secure her future happiness while ensuring she only wed for love. For this reason, he chose to be patient rather than pressuring her into a hasty marriage. Alicia emphasized that this situation was equally important to her. urging him to put his mind at ease. Luffy announced her departure, offering her well wishes for them to have a wonderful time. The protagonist failed to notice her at all, though such a reaction was typical for the servants accompanying him. She was fully aware of the nature of their relationship, and it brought her some comfort to know she wasn't the only one who knew the truth. She steered the conversation back to their strategy for influencing her father's perspective. She spoke up, asking the hero if she could hold his hand. They will need to walk hand in hand, as this gesture is expected to influence her father's opinion. Confirming the situation, the girl noted that it was impossible to tell when one of the knights might take notice of them. Though they've held hands before, the pressure of an official date has him feeling more nervous than usual. It had been a long time since he'd been able to stroll through the city with such peace of mind. From this point forward, he no longer felt the constant need to rush. Despite no longer needing to push himself to the brink, he remains committed to honing his skills in hopes of finally winning her father's approval, even as the girl urges him to stay patient and avoid any reckless moves. The man explained that the impostor had departed over a week ago and had yet to return. He needed to exercise patience, as his family lived far from the capital, and any dismissal would result in a long journey home. The blacksmith remarked that the outcome was predictable, noting that they were the only ones he could truly rely on for mercy. Lacking a blacksmithing license and the necessary documentation to find work, he was left with no choice but to head to court to resolve his situation. The conditions for his return were straightforward. He would receive no compensation for the first 2 months, followed by only a meager salary. The captain soon made his way over to the group. He had been commissioned to fulfill a new order for charms. The kingdom's highest-ranking knight arrived to meet with them. The blacksmith was honored to accept a commission from such a prestigious figure. Despite already having a personal blacksmith named T, the knight couldn't ignore the protagonist's undeniable talent. He had come specifically to request the craftsman's services. The men were stunned that such a prominent figure had come to see them personally, yet the captain still had a specific question he needed to pose. He intended to speak with the man responsible for the enchantments on his sword. The sword was issued to a common knight, but it was his apprentice who spent time working on the blade. The captain remarked that this was a welcome blessing for their current knights. Back when he was just a low-ranking knight, the swords they were issued carried such weak enchantments that they were virtually indistinguishable from ordinary blades. During that era, blacksmiths lacked the means to cast spells, as such a feat was simply impossible. The impostor was a far cry from a competent caster, as his charms were consistently ridiculous. Yet, despite his obvious lack of effort, the captain began making some rather peculiar remarks. Recalling the poor quality of blades from the past, the captain noted how impressive the blacksmith's enchantments were for a standard knight's sword, even expressing a desire to entrust his own weapon to the man. He expressed his desire to be the one to perform the incantation personally. While the captain couldn't decipher the magical script himself, his blacksmiths were so impressed by the blade's craftsmanship that he decided to seek out the master creator in person. The blacksmith dismissed him, claiming he lacked any special talent, and that his previous successful spell was likely nothing more than a stroke of luck. Fake produces hundreds of charms every week, and while a few might occasionally succeed, he lacks the inherent talent to ever achieve mastery, regardless of how much effort he exerts. Despite his intentions to eventually train him for a role, the captain decided to leave the sword in their care for the time being. Asserting his authority as the workshop head, the blacksmith insisted on casting the spell himself, confident that his expertise far exceeded the protagonist's. The captain reasoned that since the man was merely on vacation, he would return shortly, so he was willing to wait and asked me to pass along his respects while he anticipated the results of the man's work. The captain expressed his confidence in their abilities, requesting that they simply notify one of his knights once the task was finished. If the protagonist finds such profound joy in his craft, it suggests that a person's work should always be a source of genuine fulfillment. The blacksmith realized he had to seize this rare opportunity, knowing a chance like this only comes once in a lifetime. He eventually decided to take matters into his own hands and perform the spell himself. Deeply impressed by Fake's charm, the man predicted he would far surpass expectations, ultimately paving the way for him to become the captain's personal blacksmith. It seemed as though virtually anyone could have performed the task better than the protagonist. Determined to secure the rewards for himself, the man accepted the job, refusing to let such a prime opportunity go to waste. Assigned as the captain's personal blacksmith, he began his journey to etch his name into the history of the craft. Born as the fifth son into a family of accountants, his future once seemed limited, but an unexpected opportunity led him to his current role managing a court forge. A clock tower stood nearby, offering a magnificent view of the city below. Faced with a daunting staircase, the exhausted hero struggled to keep up as the girls assured him they were nearing their destination. She mentioned that this was her favorite spot, and he agreed that the scenery was truly beautiful. Believing the city lights or a sunrise would be equally breathtaking, she listened as he described the area's nighttime beauty and suggested they stay until sunset, an invitation she was happy to accept. Exertion from the climb had left him damp with sweat, and now, shivering in the biting wind, he scanned his surroundings for a place to take cover. Feeling the weight of the silence, the protagonist searched for a way to break the tension. They witnessed a confrontation where two girls were berating a man for his betrayal. He attempted to dismiss the situation as a mere accident, but the girls weren't buying any of his excuses. Acknowledging the hero as a master blacksmith, the craftsman insisted on putting his skills to the test. With his new license, he gained the right to trade within the city, allowing him to craft and sell his creations at the local store. Still, he had to be careful not to mention that he was actually engaged to the man's daughter. He agreed to begin his work immediately, with the man promising an unlimited supply of grade F and E ores while he handled sourcing any higher quality materials himself. He could now produce tools for the common folk, as his current class was more than sufficient for the task. It was finally time to return to his craft, so he began by preparing the necessary materials. Long swords are the most common weapons available for trade, and the first step is deciding exactly how many you need. Quality remains a priority, but even a perfectly balanced weapon won't find a buyer if the price is set too high. His primary clientele consists of adventurers of various standings. While he sees a fair share of C ranks, the majority are lower tier D or E rankers. Ideally, an adventurer requires a weapon that remains reliable as they rise in rank, so he considers crafting something similar to the swords he previously forged for the knights. Since it had been quite some time since he last forged a long sword, he knew he would have to put in extra effort to get it right. The molds must be resilient enough to maintain their shape, even when subjected to intense heat. To begin, the witch's ore must be melted down. By pouring molten ore into a mold and utilizing water magic, the material is able to cool down quite rapidly. With everything nearly in place, it was clear he had executed his task perfectly. They raised the temperature once more to harden the metal, finishing the process by polishing it with wind magic. To ensure the handle remained firmly in place, he needed to craft a pair of wooden nails. He proceeded to join the components by hammering nails into the pre-drilled holes, ultimately choosing a different assembly method over his initial plan to secure them at the base of the handle. With that, he finished forging a basic longsword. Doubting if he was truly prepared, the hero decided to craft an identical duplicate. The court's weapons are imbued with potent spells and undergo weekly maintenance, as the knights must be prepared to face monsters that ordinary guards could never defeat. Enchantments far too powerful for any typical adventurer to ever need. Ultimately, he managed to produce 3, leaving him puzzled as to where he found the strength to do so. If his magic had truly faded, he wouldn't have been able to keep going, but his ample power suggests the court's processing was actually responsible for the constant shortages. After successfully crafting 5 spheres, he decided that was enough for now. He reached up, intending to wipe his face. As the girl trembled in fear, the boy claimed victory, noting that she hadn't even sensed his presence. Remarking that he felt surprisingly energetic, the protagonist noted he could have handled a few more rounds, leaving the girl stunned by his impressive stamina. After enduring far more brutal conditions over the last 3 years, he felt no exhaustion and intended to forge another sword, despite the heroine's insistence that he rest after working since morning. While this workload would have once exhausted him during his time at court, he now seems to be growing much stronger. The girl remarked on Wu's relentless work ethic, noting his plan to sell swords in the city tomorrow to coincide with a 2-day merchant gathering. At this stage, the hero simply intended to sell a few blades and have them appraised, resulting in a surprisingly high grade for weapons forged from low-tier E-class ore. His exceptional craftsmanship was so highly regarded in his village that he eventually secured a position at the Royal Forge, despite his humble origins. Once at court, his incompetence was on full display, and no one bothered to soften their blunt remarks toward him. Moving forward, he would need to carry himself with more conviction, having already settled on a price he considered fair for an adventurer's primary weapon. The hero planned to sell the items the following day, while the girl noted that his most significant moment was quickly approaching. She assured him that she would provide her assistance. The young man assured her that he had no intention of exploiting her influence to increase his sales. She explained that she would wear a mask if that were the case. Alicia reassured him that everything would be fine, and since he was doing all of this for her sake, she felt a strong desire to help. He accepted the arrangement on the condition that her identity remained hidden, expressing his anticipation for the following day. The heroine pledged to do her utmost to prove the superior quality of his products to everyone. He had been deeply worried about his lack of sales, but thanks to her dedicated efforts, failure was now completely out of the question. Today marks his official debut in the world of business as he prepares for his very first trade. Before arriving at court, he sustained himself through bartering, exchanging weapons and armor for the basic necessities of food, clothing, and shelter. In this small, tight-knit community, the residents grew by constantly sharing their knowledge with one another. Since his time at court left him no room to study the complexities of trade, he now finds the market even more confusing and is unsure how to value his own work. By paying the entrance fee, he secures the right to buy and sell goods for the remainder of the day. Mentioning the girl's name in public was a mistake, as exposing his connection to the Duke would mean breaking the promise he made to his father. Since the girl needed a nickname, the young man stepped in and offered an alternative for her. Trading was strictly reserved for official fair days. Otherwise, selling goods required both a permanent shop and the necessary legal permits. Opting to start with a modest stall, the hero planned to eventually upgrade to a full shop, feeling genuinely thrilled by the prospect of professional trading. Once he secured his trading license, he was able to claim a spot for his business. At this point, he has decided to list only 2 swords for sale. He found himself completely ignored, as not a single person even bothered to approach him, let alone make a purchase. While he knew the task wouldn't be simple, he hadn't expected to find such a massive crowd already gathering at the next counter. While others had produced more visually striking results, it was clear he would need to develop a much better design for his next attempt. The girl began beckoning customers over to check out the sale. She admitted that she felt like more of a burden than an asset to the group. Though the hero expressed his gratitude for her reaching out to the customers, his true happiness stemmed from simply being by her side. Despite her certainty that high-quality blades would attract interest, no one ever approached them. Recalling his time in the village, he remembered that people were slow to reach out at first, understanding that the initial deal is always the most difficult to secure. He maintained full confidence in his craftsmanship, certain that any adventurer within his target demographic would appreciate the quality of his swords. A customer soon approached, inquiring if they had any long swords available for purchase. Your objective was to advance from your current position to a higher rank. The blade felt light and well-balanced, and the man explained he had placed a special enchantment on it, suspecting that as an F rank, the adventurer might be struggling with his finances. The hero noted that other blades were significantly more difficult to master. Under normal circumstances, he would have tried to negotiate, but haggling was out of the question here, especially since it's never wise to be so transparent about how much money you're carrying. The man pointed out that the ball's true value was significantly higher than the price being offered. However, that wasn't actually the case. Even if he had made concessions, he never intended to lower the price, as his real goal today was simply to establish his presence. The adventurer insisted the price was fair given the sword's superior quality, prompting the hero to make a rare exception and agree to the deal. In exchange, he could recommend the weapon to any adventurers he knew, though he hadn't considered that these referrals might actually start drawing in new customers. Each week during the fair, he can be found stationed behind the counter holding a flag. The buyer promised to spread the word to his circle of friends. The payout fell short of his expectations, but he was still grateful for the profit he managed to earn. With the Duke promising to provide an unlimited supply of materials, he no longer had to worry about any financial constraints. With the first sword finally sold, the protagonist had successfully reached his objective for the day. Recognizing that clearing his entire stock was unlikely, he focused on making just one sale, confident that the young adventurer showing off his new sword would eventually draw in more customers. The girl reassured him that success was certain because he had crafted the swords himself, promising that their next attempt would be even better than today's. This transaction marked his first successful sale in the market, which he felt was a promising start. He determined that it was time to report the final results to the man. The protagonist confirmed that only a single long sword had been sold. He offered the payment as a token of gratitude for the workshop access and materials, hoping it would be accepted. The man reassured the Switcher that he had no intention of cutting off their supplies, advising him not to worry. To secure the agreement, he had to reduce his rates, resulting in a smaller payout than expected. It was clear the man still had a significant amount of work ahead of him. He admitted his hesitation to leave such a complicated situation in his daughter's hands. The hero remained confident, asserting that their sales would undoubtedly continue to rise. The blacksmith countered that if he was so sure, he should prove it through results rather than mere promises. He realized that to boost his sales, he would need to conduct a much more thorough analysis of the market. Noticing the massive selection of weaponry available, he decided to take a closer look at the various gun shops in the area. He began by observing how the various shops showcased their merchandise. Long swords had become a highly sought-after item. When faced with two equally functional choices, people naturally gravitate toward the more visually striking option, leading him to consider adding intricate carvings to the handles. He decided to expand his stock by adding daggers, noting their versatility as throwing weapons, while also providing utility knives that were in high demand for everyday household use. Meeting representatives from every rank there can prove to be quite advantageous. He realized that if he ever ran low on funds, this would be a practical place to earn some extra cash. While the protagonist noted that adventurers never seem to change, the girl countered that they simply live life to the fullest, leading him to finally head off and register. He eventually made his way to the adventurer registration department. With no signs to indicate otherwise, he assumed the process wouldn't take very long. Registration only requires two things: a name and a personal file. But since he lacks the latter, he's forced to start his application from scratch. He presented his guild registration card and inquired about the details of his magical abilities. After completing his registration, he was thanked and advised to report any lost documents immediately. While his first card was issued for free, he was warned that a small fee would apply for any future replacements. The protagonist witnessed a group of men beginning to harass the girl. The young man immediately stepped forward to defend her. He informed the girl that it was time for them to depart. Taking her hand, they informed her that they were finished. As the men began shouting at him, he urged her to navigate her way through the crowd. As one of the adventurers began to follow them, he accidentally collided with a nearby bystander. The man responded with a sudden burst of hostility. Admitting her confusion, the girl explained that she had never been approached in such a manner before. She admitted that she was feeling a bit frightened. Regretting his decision, he admitted he should have brought her with him, but she reassured him that his timely arrival was all that mattered. Moreover, as her personal maid, I remained close by, ready to step in at the first sign of danger. With some time remaining before the next fair, the hero decided to focus on refining the quality of his daggers. The process begins by melting the ore using traditional methods. The mixture is then poured into a mold shaped by earth magic to create a steel plate. The next phase of the process involved focusing on enhancing the overall quality of the steel. Recognizing the material was full of impurities, he utilized his magic to carefully extract the unwanted components. He carefully regulated the plate's heat, alternating between raising the temperature and delivering constant hammer strikes to keep it consistent. This process must be repeated several times to refine the metal to its absolute highest quality. He decided to inspect the magic code and found the runes still perfectly aligned, knowing full well that any error in his technique could result in the code's total destruction. He needs to focus on better directing the flow of magic as he works with the hammer. Though the repairs remained a bit unpolished, he had successfully managed to fix it. The final adjustments to the charms are only made once the rest of the work is complete, at which point the final runes are restored. Since the spell doesn't need to be cast from the start, this part of the process can be saved for the very end. Now it was time to forge the metal plate into a knife. The process required cooling the object with water magic before giving it a final polish using the wind. The blade was expertly crafted with a razor-sharp edge, serving as a versatile tool for both combat and butchery, though finalizing its magical properties had been a lengthy process. As a result, the knife's quality far surpassed that of a typical weapon, leading him to take a break so he wouldn't cause the girl any unnecessary worry. He assumed he would have the chance to handle one more task later on. He found it difficult to stop in his excited state, but he ultimately reined himself in to keep from making the girl worry again. Alicia approached him, and he invited her to take a look at what he had been working on. She noted that the quality had significantly improved since the last time. The girl remarked that he always knew how to impress, and after thanking her, he felt motivated to perform one more feat. She noted that with only a few days remaining until the auction, there was no need to rush. She expressed how much she enjoyed watching him work, yet admitted that his long hours at the forge often left her feeling lonely. While she recognizes how much this means to him, she secretly wishes she could spend just a few more moments by his side. Believing she had spotted the maid, he concluded that her performance as the bride was remarkably convincing. Knowing they could be watched at any moment, they had to stay in character and maintain the appearance of being deeply in love. The protagonist expressed his desire to spend every possible second with her, motivating him to finish his work as quickly as possible. He proposed that they spend the rest of the day in each other's company. Alicia expressed her gratitude to him for the green item. Alicia pointed out that they were quite a distance from their previous location, to which the protagonist admitted he had intended to leave sooner but had become sidetracked. He noted that while staying in a memorable location is ideal, the competitive first-come, first-served environment makes it difficult. So he inquired if the swords were arranged the same way as last time. He explained that while these blades were of superior quality, they required fewer materials to craft. Once she acknowledged this, he revealed his plan to sell them for 20,000 to 30,000 crowns. At that moment, the girl began shouting greetings to every passerby, inviting them to stop and browse the available goods. Alicia pointed out that attracting customers was predictably difficult, a sentiment he shared while noting that her clear voice reached the crowd without actually drawing anyone into the shop. Believing he lacked any real talent for trading, he felt a wave of pity for Alicia, just as someone suddenly called out his name. She encouraged him to speak with pride and carry himself more confidently. noting that the high quality of his products justified a bolder attitude. The protagonist gave her a smile and admitted she was right, and the two of them began calling out to attract potential customers. An hour had already passed when the imposter asked the girl if she was exhausted, but she reassured him that she was fine and still giving it her all. Just then, the protagonist heard voices as two men spotted him and offered a greeting. Fulfilling his promise, the man introduced his teammate, a fellow adventurer named Wezer, before finally revealing his own name as Ivas, which he had failed to mention during their previous meeting. After offering his sincere gratitude and introducing himself, the protagonist watched as Weiser began to examine the assortment. The animal-eared man asked to inspect a specific blade, and after receiving a nod of approval, I mentioned how easy his previous purchase from the shop had been to handle. He noted its sharpness and light weight, impressed by how perfectly it fit his grip and far outclassed his previous gear. In response, Fakes expressed his gratitude, clearly pleased that his work was so well received. Ivas explained that his new sword helped him reach E rank last week, an achievement the guild noted was remarkably fast. Now a local celebrity, he received a warm congratulation from Faye. The protagonist questioned if his success was a result of his own abilities, but Ivas clarified that wasn't the case, leading Weiser to ask about the price of the sword he'd selected. The protagonist asked if 40,000 crowns was an acceptable price, causing the man to blush and tentatively offer to sell it for 30,000 instead. Faka agreed to the arrangement, requesting that they recommend his services to their friends if they were satisfied with the quality, a condition they happily accepted. Scanning the counter, Ivas noticed a selection of knives, which he was told were versatile enough for both combat and butchering prey, an idea he found quite tempting. He then inquired about the price of the knives, to which the protagonist stated they were 30,000 each. After briefly attempting to negotiate, the man quickly apologized for his request. Fake believed he finally had a chance to negotiate, and with a limit of 30,000, he was willing to make a small concession, mentioning aloud that he had brought a friend along today. After he proposed the price of 20,000, they expressed their satisfaction, prompting the man to ask if he could test the sword's cutting edge. After accepting the blade, the protagonist examined it and noted that its enchantment had begun to fade. He was asked if he understood how they functioned, and he replied that he knew blacksmiths often used them to enhance a blade. Fakes then explained that every sword contains an internal magic code, and his was finally starting to deteriorate. When the man asked if the item could be repaired, the protagonist assured him that as a blacksmith, the task would be simple, even offering to update the charms for free this first time. Once the work was done, the protagonist assured them that everything was in order and functioning perfectly. He then noted that future services would cost 5,000 crowns, advising the client to handle the weapon with more care. Fake mentioned that their services were always available for future needs, and Ivas promised to get in touch once he had the funds before they finally parted ways. After Alicia thanked the group for their purchase, one of the men inquired about her identity, prompting the protagonist to introduce her as his assistant, Ali. He inquired if she was his lover, catching the protagonist off guard. The protagonist found himself questioning why the man was even speaking to him in such a manner. Fick acknowledged that although Alicia was technically his fiancée, the arrangement was strictly for show, making him reluctant to discuss it openly. After coming to a full understanding, he reflected on how wonderful it would be to work alongside a loved one, especially since he personally dreamed of one day setting out on a journey with a kind companion. Wishing him luck, the protagonist briefly questioned his own behavior before placing a hand on his friend's shoulder to thank them once more for their help. Fake found it hard to believe he had earned such a significant amount, as the hard work he put in just last week was already beginning to yield results. Turning toward the girl, the protagonist began to ask if everything was all right, but he trailed off upon noticing her peculiar expression. She claimed to be his fiancée to provide an explanation, though he worried that such a fake engagement might lead to her true identity being exposed. Alicia noted their successful sales for the day, and the protagonist agreed, expressing his hope that the two customers would achieve great things while wielding his weapons. He expressed a keen interest in seeing how their destinies would eventually unfold, but as midday arrived, he noted that they were no longer able to make any more sales. Fake attributed their situation to simple misfortune, reminding himself to stay patient and take things one step at a time, just as a girl called out to inform him they had finally found a buyer. Stroking his chin thoughtfully, the blond man in the hat mentioned that he had seen a merchant selling swords and daggers. After confirming the details, the protagonist invited him to take a closer look, prompting the man to unsheath a knife and ask if it was truly forged from E-class witch ore. The fake agreed with him, leading him to conclude that the man must be a seasoned trader given how efficiently he had managed to sell his goods. The blond man noted his years of experience in the trade, pointing out that the weapons were crafted so skillfully that their E-class material was barely recognizable. After a final inspection, he decided to take every sword and knife available. Negotiations soon began, and although the protagonist hoped to sell for 50,000 crowns, he quickly realized his opponent was a master at haggling. Conceding defeat, the impostor offered to sell his entire inventory for 35,000 crowns, asking for a recommendation to other potential customers in exchange, a deal the man accepted. Ultimately, he lowered the price far more than he had intended, a sacrifice that clearly pained him, while the client remarked that both the assistant and the mask would be hard to forget. Faye expressed her gratitude while worrying if she was being too conspicuous, but he admitted that her mask and lovely voice were exactly what drew him to the counter, leading Alicia to thank him again. Waving farewell, the blonde man mentioned they would meet again, prompting the protagonist to agree and offer his thanks. Faye expressed his gratitude to the girl, crediting her for their success, but she insisted the achievement was his alone, noting that this specific client would surely help them attract many more in the future. He expressed his satisfaction with how things were unfolding, especially after selling 2 swords and 2 knives for a total of 85,000 crowns, a significant increase compared to his earnings from the previous week. Eventually, he delivered the profits to Mr. Gorel, noting that while this venture was more successful, many local blacksmiths were still capable of reaching the same figures. Feeling that the total was underwhelming and his current skills were still lacking, Faye thanked the man and prepared to depart, but he was quickly halted. After the protagonist asked if something was troubling him, the man explained that a blacksmith named Robert was scheduled to arrive the next day to propose. Gorov explained that he would eventually inherit his family's title and become a vicar, a prospect that Faye noted he understood perfectly. Although he considered himself a legitimate contender for Alicia's hand, she viewed his company as a burden, especially since he had only appeared because he was struggling to manage his own duties. The man went on to describe Robert as a highly ambitious individual, and as the protagonist echoed his sentiment, the gentleman continued to offer further praise. When Faye asked for clarification, the man explained that Robert was someone with a notably high libido. Struggling to suppress his amusement, the protagonist hoped Gorel would stop being so deadpan, as he was already on the verge of bursting into laughter. The men revealed that Robert had previously expressed interest in Alicia, but his persistent advances only seemed to push her away, confirming Faye's long-held belief that she wasn't fond of men like him. Gorel warned the others to show Robert complete respect, noting his apparent sincerity, while privately acknowledging that his own talents were lacking compared to the men who would eventually follow. Mr. Gorel expressed his concerns that he couldn't make Alicia truly happy, admitting that the protagonist was a much better match for her. He offered his thanks, but privately felt the man didn't look like much of a charmer, even if he was right about his own complete lack of experience with women. Gorel cautioned himself against overthinking a situation he had yet to fully accept, as he struggled to find a balance between his own strict demands and his daughter's happiness. Faye perceived the man as a truly devoted father. Despite the aristocratic pressure to secure a strategic marriage, he genuinely prioritized his daughter's happiness. After Faye promised not to disappoint him, the man encouraged him to give it his best effort. The protagonist felt a deep sense of guilt for deceiving a man who loved Alicia dearly and had supported him with high expectations, only to be met with disrespect in return. To maintain his standing, he realized he needed to further hone his craft, acknowledging the difficulty of the task ahead. Upon returning to the room, Alicia questioned him about why her father had failed to recognize him. Confirming the situation, he admitted his sales performance was still underwhelming, though the girl reminded him of the immense effort they had both put in. Noticing her unusually light attire, he felt she should be more cautious, especially considering her reputation as one of the most beautiful and noble women in the world. Suspecting that Mr. Gorel shared his concerns, the protagonist quickly caught himself, deciding it was best to stop dwelling on such inappropriate thoughts. Faye explained that he was currently restricted to trading just once a week, and to increase his market presence, he would need to open his own shop as soon as possible. Even so, customers wouldn't simply flock to the store, making it essential to first establish a reputation within the trading community. Alicia agreed, noting the high costs of operating a shop and the necessity of building a loyal customer base. Though he still had plenty on his plate, he was willing to set it aside for Alicia, even if he felt unsure about his ability to act as her cover. His incompetence meant that a new suitor was set to emerge, and he informed her that a nobleman named Robert would be arriving the following day. Alicia acknowledged the situation, realizing she couldn't avoid his presence, which led the protagonist to offer an apology. He explained that his role as her fiancée was meant to discourage other suitors, but despite his failure, she reassured him not to worry. Admitting her discomfort with people like him, Alicia asked to meet privately after their current business concluded. to which he replied that she could find him in the workshop whenever she was ready. After offering her thanks, she asked if something had happened, noting that he seemed to be acting a bit out of character. As she pondered her own words, she realized she had been sitting there for a considerable amount of time. He asked for clarification while trying to determine what response she expected, wondering if her provocative appearance was a deliberate attempt to test him. Alicia considered the thought, mentioning the common belief that dressing in such a way is a surefire way to make any man fall in love. When Fakes inquired about who had spoken, she identified Leafy, who realized they viewed him as a mastermind and wanted his advice on how to handle the other suitors. The protagonist remarked that, speaking hypothetically, if they were actually married, they would likely be doing something much more intimate at a moment like this. Before he could finish his thought, she interrupted to ask about their next move, but he quickly brushed her off, leading her to question if he had already fallen in love. Fakes remarked that any man would surely fall for her, a sentiment he found obvious before she asked for his opinion on her dress. Alicia began reflecting on her lack of natural gifts and asked if it bothered him, leaving him puzzled by the sudden question. She questioned whether he truly preferred women with larger chests and pressed him for his opinion on her own figure, while internally, he pleaded for her to stop and wondered why she was putting him in such a position. As a new day began, the men discussed Mr. Morgan's promotion to the Knight Commander's personal blacksmith, questioning if he would apply for the soon-to-be vacant Forge Master position. Morgan anticipated the Knight Commander's evaluation of his latest enchantment, secretly hoping his craftsmanship would earn him the prestigious role of personal blacksmith. Just then, a knock at the door revealed a knight who remarked on how long it had been since they last met. While Morgan privately hoped the man was there to offer him a promotion, the visitor instead asked if Fake was present. Taken aback by their renewed interest in the protagonist, the man remarked that his return was still fully expected. Despite the situation, the knight expressed his desire to discuss the sword he had previously entrusted to him. Morgan cut him off, explaining that since the Fake was currently on vacation, he had stepped in to handle his responsibilities. The knight declared that everything had finally become clear, leading Morgan to inquire about his thoughts on the sword. His sudden outburst of rage caught the bystanders off guard, but as he swung his sword, the weapon unexpectedly shattered. The knight lunged at Morgan, seizing him by the collar with a blade to his throat as he sternly warned him that his actions were unacceptable. Morgan immediately sought an explanation, prompting the knight to reveal that his personal blacksmith had inspected the charms and dismissed them as remarkably mediocre work. The knight warned that using the sword at its full capacity would cause it to shatter, and no longer willing to tolerate such incompetence, he strictly ordered that a substitute handle the task instead. He followed up by asking once more about the protagonist's whereabouts and the specific location of his vacation. Morgan was gripped by an unfamiliar sense of fear, as he had never been berated so harshly before. Typically, the mere mention of his father, one of the nation's most influential figures, was enough to force anyone into immediate submission. The Forge staff informed the knight that the man was no longer employed there, prompting him to ask for an explanation given that the artisan's skill was enough to pique even his master's interest. Morgan marveled at the imposter's immense talent, finding it hard to believe that the original creator's work could actually be inferior. The man informed Faye that he was free to resign at any time, leading the knight to ask if he had truly stepped down. After confirming his departure, they apologized for the sword's poor quality and noted that he had already left. Knight closed his eyes and asked if they knew where he was headed, but after they admitted they didn't, he claimed to finally understand the truth, and the group hasn't fulfilled a single order since that day. The boy shouted for them to regain their focus, demanding they cast their spells correctly and arm the knights before they were left completely defenseless. The knights were rapidly running out of resources, having fully expected Fake to handle the heavy lifting, and they couldn't understand why he still hadn't returned. He questioned why they were still lingering, and if his instructions had been unclear, but they quickly assured him they understood perfectly and would begin their work immediately. The Forge employees watched him with visible dread as the knights acknowledged his observations, ordering the staff to contact him the moment the Fake's whereabouts were discovered. Once he left the Forge, the others questioned what to do with the massive surplus of swords. As more weapons continued to arrive daily, Morgan ordered them to get to work immediately. Believing a malicious individual was behind his troubles, he shouted that he had to find a way to complete his task on schedule. As he stepped away from the Forge, the knight couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that something was seriously off with the court blacksmiths. Just then, another man called him over to report a pressing matter regarding a newly arrived shipment of swords that required his attention. After a long period without new equipment, the group had been struggling with deteriorating gear until a fresh shipment finally arrived, though he pointed out that the quality of the new enchantments was still severely lacking. The knight explained that he needed to inspect the magic code, prompting the blacksmith to ask if he'd be all right, given how ill he felt after his last attempt. However, the knight assured him he would be more careful this time. Realizing his current abilities were insufficient to decipher the magical code of the spell cast by the impostor, he felt a wave of physical strain from attempting to analyze a technique far beyond his level. Attempting to read Fake's magic spells caused him to turn inside out multiple times, making it clear that the caster's level far exceeded his own. Although others performed the spell this time, they are still the court blacksmiths, making them the most skilled craftsmen in the kingdom, second only to Morgan. Upon inspecting the work, he grew indignant, dismissing the markings as amateurish scribbles that would only serve to destroy the sword from the inside. The blonde asked the blacksmith if anyone else had received these swords, and he admitted he hadn't because he considered them to be failures. The knight agreed with his decision, noting that the weapons were far too poorly made to be functional. Gazing at the sword, he realized this nonsense would only damage the blade, forcing him to rewrite its entire magical code from the ground up. He hadn't anticipated such a lackluster performance from a group reputed to be the finest in the country. Turning to the blacksmith, the blonde man inquired about their stock of high-quality swords, only to learn that they lacked the numbers necessary to carry out the plan for clearing the monsters. He decided to prioritize the new recruits who couldn't yet afford their own gear, advising them to use the equipment sparingly while he sought out the blacksmith who had previously worked on his sword. The knight identified the man as Mr. Figure, the craftsman who had forged his sword. Despite Figure's difficult reputation and the uncertainty of his cooperation, the knight realized he was their only option and decided to seek him out. Blone blamed the Kuznetsovs for the situation, intending to launch an internal investigation later while he focused on locating Fake's current position. The royal court operates as a massive, secluded institution where clandestine deals are the norm, and newcomers are subjected to a notoriously brutal training process. He felt certain that something was stirring in the shadows, especially as he questioned whether the recent influx of high-quality swords could all be clever forgeries. Even to someone as inexperienced as him, his rare talent was undeniable, as few others in the country could produce such an incredible balance of quality and quantity. The knight remarked that Fake's departure would set their progress back 50 years, just as the blacksmith questioned him once more. The blonde man felt certain that both Morgan and the court blacksmiths were hiding something from him. Watching from the window, Fakes identified the dignified newcomer as Robert, and felt a surge of envy over his own powerlessness. He considered offering a greeting but quickly thought better of it. Since the man was a fellow contender, he didn't want to risk an accidental provocation and decided it was best to spend the day in his workshop. Eventually, the protagonist came face to face with Robert, while Alicia stood behind them and apologized, explaining that Robert had been adamant about meeting him at least once. Robert acknowledged his role as Alice's fiancé, prompting the protagonist to offer a handshake and a formal introduction. Robert politely reciprocated the gesture, expressing his own pleasure as he introduced himself in return. Robert took Fake's hand to examine it closely, prompting the protagonist to immediately ask for an explanation. He reassured them that he was all right, simply lost in admiration for his hands, which now felt remarkably strong with firm, dense skin. Robert then turned his attention to Alicia, questioning if she always made a habit of hiding behind others. He mentioned it had been quite a while since they last met, recalling a moment she stood behind a maid during their book discussions in the garden. When he expressed feeling somewhat slighted by the memory, the girl quickly offered her apologies. After observing her closely, a realization struck Robert. He remarked on how much she had grown, prompting her to ask for confirmation once more. Turning toward the protagonist, the man asked if he was enjoying his stay, leading the startled main character to reflexively shift his gaze toward the girl. Fake felt the mounting awkwardness of the situation, noticing that Alicia seemed just as inexperienced with such topics. Yet he knew he had to maintain their facade to ensure no one suspected the truth about their relationship. Furthermore, he felt he had no excuse to lose to this opponent regardless of her feelings for him, especially after he openly declared his deep love and obsession for Alicia. Stunned, the girl watched as Robert addressed her by name, requesting a moment to speak with her in private. Once they were alone, Robert's attention turned to the sword, and he asked for permission to examine it. Fake agreed, silently observing as the talented blacksmith took a moment to appreciate his own craftsmanship. The man picked up the weapon to inspect its edge, asking if it was enchanted before praising its craftsmanship, which the protagonist acknowledged with a word of thanks. He explained that he was forged in a magical war, prompting Robert to admit that his impressive talent and the skillful execution of those final spells now made perfect sense. After returning the sword to its place, Robert admitted that he sometimes speaks without thinking and shouldn't be taken too seriously, prompting Fake to immediately ask for clarification. Robert approached the table and picked up a knife, admitting that he had been talking nonsense. He confessed to having no real talent or interest in blacksmithing, a revelation that left the protagonist deeply surprised. He explained that he considers his skills to be average compared to other blacksmiths, which is why he serves in his current role as an aristocrat. Robert remarked on Lady Alicia's striking beauty, noting that many men were eager to win her hand in marriage. He complimented her beauty, likening her to a delicate flower, yet he couldn't help but feel a sense of regret as she continued to mature. Confused by his words, the protagonist questioned if he realized she was only 18, but Robert dismissed him, claiming she had been that way in the past. He commented on how fragile she used to be, remarking that she once seemed small enough to break from a single hug. When she didn't quite understand his point, he explained that she had finally grown up. While Lady Alicia is certainly a beautiful young woman, her looks aren't enough to satisfy him, as he holds a clear preference for younger girls. Robert tearfully claimed that if Alicia were 20 centimeters shorter and had a smaller chest, things might be different, as her current appearance fails to move him at all. As the protagonist listened to the speech, he questioned the logic of the claim that her size was a perfect reflection of her sophistication. Pushing his wandering thoughts aside, he asked Robert to be direct, and Robert bluntly admitted that he simply no longer felt the same passion for her. After explaining his understanding of the situation, the protagonist asked if Robert had lost interest, which Robert frankly confirmed to be true. Clarifying his stance, he explained that he lacked both a noble title and reckless ambition, preferring instead to reach greater heights as an independent warrior. He realizes the Barnasto family is looking for a blacksmith son-in-law, and though he prefers monster hunting, his parents' persistence forces him to maintain the facade for the sake of his family. Robert rushed over and grabbed the protagonist, wishing him luck while demanding that their conversation be kept a secret from the Barnasto family. Faye acknowledged the situation, prompting Robert to express his approval and mention his personal interest in one of the swords. When the man inquired if the item was for sale, the protagonist confirmed it was, prompting Robert to ask about the price. Comparing it to the weapon he'd recently sold to Iwasu, he noted the sword's superior quality and more detailed hilt. When he wondered aloud if 10,000 crowns would be a sufficient price, Robert confirmed that it was. Though the protagonist worried he was asking for too much, the nobleman didn't hesitate as he held out an inventory box. Each of these boxes has a limited capacity, yet they are so expensive that a single one costs as much as an ordinary person's annual salary. Robert handed over the payment and asked him to verify the amount. Once confirmed, he reminded the man of his request to potentially supply weapons in the future. The protagonist agreed to wait for him, prompting Robert to suggest they set aside formalities and speak as friends. The protagonist initially intended to protest, but he stopped short after seeing Robert's expression as the man asked for his support moving forward. A short while later, they returned to Alicia, who questioned if the practice sword was truly what he had been looking for. Robert confirmed it was and mentioned that he also needed to have a word with the man. Recognizing the blacksmith's impressive talent, the man purchased the sword as a sample, and both agreed to maintain their connection moving forward. With a final wave, Robert bid them farewell and offered his best wishes, noting that he intended to visit Lady Alicia again in the future. Exhaling in relief, the protagonist noted their success, prompting the girl to offer her gratitude and praise, which he warmly reciprocated by acknowledging her hard work as well. When he asked if there were others like Robert, she confirmed his suspicions, prompting him to remark that many more such cases were bound to emerge. He noted that while Robert had turned out well so far, the future remained unpredictable. Alicia requested to inspect the merchandise as well, prompting the protagonist to showcase his highest quality items: 3 knives and 3 swords of Class D+ rank, the same model Robert had recently purchased. Following these were 3 D-rank swords and 3 knives, which Ivis promptly collected. With the addition of E-class daggers and F-class items, his inventory now featured a diverse selection across all grades. Noticing an influx of new faces in the market, he prepares a selection of F-class weapons specifically for adventurers on a tight budget. The imposter noted that they had a massive supply of goods this time, and intended to negotiate with buyers, as his main priority was persuading them to make a purchase. Determined to give his absolute best that day, he felt bolstered by the girl's encouragement as she announced that the trading had officially begun. While taking in their surroundings, the protagonist pointed out the growing crowd, leading the girl to suggest they raise their voices just as a passerby noticed their bench. Faye recalled selling an F-class knife and a sword earlier that morning, having accepted a buyer's offer of 12,000 crowns. He had hoped to secure 15,000 for the items, but he was outmatched by the other man's superior bargaining skills and his genuine commitment to supporting adventurers. If he can successfully open a line of communication, the outcome might mirror his experience with IVUS, leading him to view the move as a strategic investment for the future. Just then, a voice called out, remarking on how much time had passed since they last met. Looking up, they recognized the same merchant from before. Faye expressed his pleasure at seeing him again, prompting the merchant to ask how they had been faring. Upon realizing this was the traveling merchant, the protagonist was clearly overjoyed and hoped they would cross paths again. The merchant noted that the sword was exceptionally useful on his travels, as it was far lighter, more durable, and easier to handle than he had originally anticipated. Flattered by the praise, the protagonist expressed his gratitude as the man noted the weapon's exceptional magic conductivity, making it hard to believe the blade was forged from lowly E-class ore. Surprised by the merchant's praise, Faye expressed his delight that the sword was so well received, while the merchant marveled at how its magic reinforced the blade during use, calling the enchanted weapon a true miracle. The blond man expressed his intent to purchase more today, surprising the protagonist by asking if he could take a small portion of everything available. The merchant remarked that even a single glance was enough to see this batch's quality far surpassed the previous one. After expressing interest in the weaponry and asking to inspect them, the merchant assumed he was looking at a low-tier D-rank item, failing to realize just how sharp the man's eye for quality actually was. After inspecting the inventory and selecting several items, the merchant expressed his thanks and inquired about the price, to which the protagonist clarified that there were 12 blades and swords in total. After re-examining the items, the merchant declared he would buy the entire lot, catching the protagonist completely off guard. He voiced his thanks for the decision before instructing Alice to pack their things, a request she readily accepted. Faye finalized the price at 500,000 crowns, an arrangement that left both parties feeling satisfied. He anticipated that this merchant would be a much tougher negotiator than Robert, but despite the man's expertise, he managed to walk away with an unexpectedly favorable deal. After expressing his gratitude, the merchant realized he had yet to introduce himself, revealing his name was Rick. Turning to the protagonist, he pointed out a counterfeit engraving on the handle and asked for permission to use it, which was promptly granted. The merchant expressed his sincere appreciation and thanked him once more, while the protagonist bowed his head, returning the sentiment. With a smile, he announced his departure and assured them that their paths would cross again. Alicia declared that he had finally succeeded, noting that his significant purchases had made their dream a reality, and leaving her overjoyed by the thought of his powerful new weapon. The protagonist thanked her, noting that her encouragement had bolstered his confidence, and laughed as he vowed to maintain that same momentum. Unfortunately, the entire stock had already sold out due to the high demand for different classes, a factor he realized he would need to plan for in the future. As they made their way back home, Alicia commented on their impressive sales for the day, though Faye credited their success entirely to the peddler, Rick. He expressed his sincere gratitude to Alicia for her help, but she insisted their success was simply due to the high quality of his products. At that moment, he heard his name called and realized it was Ivis and Vizer, who remarked on how long it had been since they last met and asked how things were going. Faye greeted the group, and after confirming he was heading home as they asked, Weather suddenly called out to them by name. He expressed his admiration for the sword, noting that its ease of use far surpassed his initial expectations. The protagonist expressed his satisfaction, and after the man thanked him once more for the quality blade, our lead mentioned that he had a request to make. He then inquired if the protagonist accepted custom requests, a question that left the main character visibly stunned. Faye responded positively and asked if there were any specific requirements, to which I noted that, while the sword felt comfortable, I asked if it could be made slightly shorter. Acknowledging the situation, the protagonist realized a dagger would be more practical than a sword, while Weather requested a weapon with a longer and wider blade. Faye confirmed the request was possible, but noted he needed more information to understand their specific requirements. He added that custom orders would come at a higher price, suggesting they meet later to discuss the finer details. Their friends shared their excitement and accepted the proposal, prompting him to decide that he would begin processing individual orders immediately. Ivis inquired about his availability, and after Faker replied that he was free whenever, the man suggested they meet the following day at the Adventurers Guild to see if they were interested in embarking on a quest together. After initially questioning the offer, they eventually agreed, prompting Fake to explain that he needed to observe them in combat to determine the specific type of swords they required. He realized he would need to visit a gun shop to find a similar model to use as a reference, while the others concurred that the quality of the item was exceptional. Afterward, Ithas and Wacer waved goodbye with cheerful smiles, expressing their excitement to meet again the following day. Alicia asked if they were heading out on an adventure the next day, and when he invited her to join, she readily accepted, noting she had already heard rumors of his combat skills. Fake explained that he had gathered all the materials personally before arriving at court. When she expressed a desire to join him, he warned her of the risks, but she countered that her fencing skills would ensure she wasn't a burden. The protagonist assured her that he understood the situation, promising to protect her from harm and insisting she stay by his side the following day. Alicia blushed at his words and asked him to repeat them, though he merely questioned why she needed to hear it again. Clearly touched by his words, she asked him to say them once more, but he admitted it felt too awkward to repeat while privately wondering what had prompted her sudden change in attitude. Blushing, the protagonist asked her to stay by his side and promised to protect her, causing the girl's face to turn an even deeper shade of red. Faye questioned if the situation felt awkward and asked if she would have given him the same response, but she simply asked what he was hoping to hear. He briefly considered how much he wanted to hear her feelings for him, but he quickly dismissed the thought, feeling it was far too straightforward. He voiced his desire to hear her admit she wanted to be near him, leading Alicia to ask if he truly wanted to hear those words from her. Though he worried he had put her in an awkward position too soon, he impulsively blurted out that it wasn't an issue. Alicia was instantly offended by his remark, and while he tried to explain his question further, she simply tuned him out and walked away, leaving him completely stunned. The protagonist questioned her departure and asked her to wait, to which she replied that she would speak her mind if he truly wanted to hear it. Fick felt a sense of relief that she hadn't forced him to repeat that phrase again, taking it as a sign that their dynamic was finally shifting. Back in Mr. Goral's office, the protagonist reported that the day's revenue had reached 512,000 crowns, prompting the man to immediately ask for clarification. Fakes showcased a diverse collection of weapons, catching the eye of Rick the peddler, who decided to purchase the entire stock wholesale. The man expressed his understanding, confident that if the peddler was satisfied, he would return to purchase even more in the future. Fakes attributed their success to the excellent working conditions Mr. Goral had established, though Goral clarified that he was still on probation and hadn't actually authorized any changes yet. Mentioning a detail he heard from Alicia, the man asked for confirmation on whether they were truly heading out on an adventure the next day. Accepting the offer, the protagonist explained that he would be joining the adventurers who had placed custom orders to observe their gear in action. He aims to craft a weapon tailored specifically to them, recognizing that every adventurer needs a blade that complements their unique combat style. To ensure the order is executed with absolute precision, he decides to observe their techniques firsthand. Goral remarked on his meticulous attention to detail, leading the protagonist to explain that he spares no effort in ensuring his work is of the highest quality. The man offered to provide them with an escort to guard against potential long-range surveillance, noting that he would be held responsible if anything happened to Alicia. He then shifted the conversation to inquire about the protagonist's combat experience. Fake explained that he had gathered enough supplies before arriving at court to handle lower-level monsters with ease, much to Goral's relief. The man suggested testing his abilities in the future, and the protagonist agreed, offering to provide a demonstration of his own if it ever became necessary. Eventually, he returned to his chambers and reflected on how long it had been since his last battle, yet the familiar sensation of combat gave him confidence that everything would be all right. As a new day began, the protagonist and Alicia reunited with their friends, who were buzzing with excitement as they suggested it was finally time to move forward. Ives suggested they set aside formalities and speak more casually, to which the protagonist agreed, provided everyone was comfortable with the change. He also asked Ava Sue to address him more casually, but the young man insisted that doing so was simply beyond him. When the protagonist inquired about their plans, the group explained they had accepted a guild quest to hunt monsters in the forest, with Fake confirming that this was indeed their designated hunting ground. Adopting a more serious tone, he explained that the area was likely home to goblins and a pack of wolves led by a powerful alpha. Vaser warned that orcs resided deeper within the forest, though they were the most dangerous monsters in the area. In response, the Fake clarified that they had no plans to venture that far. The man explained that their objective for the day was to demonstrate their fighting style, instructing him to observe closely while the protagonist confirmed his understanding. As the boys led the way, Fake and Alicia followed behind. But when he suddenly clutched his chest and closed his eyes, she grew concerned and asked if he was in any pain. Reassuring her that he was fine, the protagonist explained he was merely casting a spell on himself, leaving the girl shocked and questioning if he was truly serious. Fake explained that the technique functioned similarly to reinforcement magic, allowing one to strengthen their body while monitoring its condition. He compared it to tempering a blade, emphasizing that it was a meticulous process designed to avoid any harm to one's health. Believing this was the best way to keep her safe, he urged her to speak up immediately if anything felt wrong, and she gave him her word. Turning around, Ivis addressed Mr. Fike, noting that they clearly hadn't been wasting their time. After being told to stop teasing, he insisted he was being sincere because of how cute they looked, before turning to ask the girl if she had any combat experience. She admitted she only knew enough for self-defense. Acknowledging the possibility that he'd need to protect her, he instructed the girl to lean her shoulder against his. He began explaining how their simple touches would eventually lead to passionate embraces, but Wazer cut him off before he could finish his thought. He advised the group to ignore the individual, and when questioned about why the beastmen were so powerful, Fake reassured him that everything was under control. Moments later, Alicia tugged at his clothes and asked to stay by his side, to which he agreed while reminding her of the dangers surrounding them. After pulling her into an embrace, Fake felt his heart racing with intensity and vowed to protect her, knowing they had to remain cautious within the forest. Weather suddenly sensed a presence and halted the group, warning that wolves were closing in and instructing the protagonist and the girl to take cover behind the others. After signaling to Ivisu that it was time to strike, the pair lunged at the approaching wolves, moving with a speed that caught Fake completely off guard. Ivis quickly evaded the wolf's strike, fueling the beast's rage as it immediately charged at him again. Ivis suddenly stepped aside and swung his sword, announcing his intent to go first as he swiftly killed the wolf. As the remaining beasts stared ahead in shock, Weather materialized behind them, swinging his sword and announcing that the second one was finished. After calling out for the wolf to take what it desired, he swung his blade and cleaved his opponent in two before swiftly dispatching the second enemy. After a few moments, Wezer declared that the task was finished and turned toward Evis, who commended his work, while Fake watched the scene unfold in complete shock. The protagonist realized that their strategy relied on him acting as a distraction while Vezor delivered the finishing blow. Ivis moves with remarkable dexterity to evade his enemies, utilizing the superior strength inherent to beastmen to gain a significant advantage over ordinary humans. The protagonist expressed his full approval and immediately began contemplating the types of weapons he could craft for the group. He remarked on their impressive blend of speed and power, confident that no monster in the forest could best them before asking for a chance to test his own skills. Stunned by his revelation, the group pressed him for clarification before eventually arriving at the site and taking cover within the bushes. Spotting monsters in the clearing ahead, the protagonist questioned if the two creatures were indeed goblins, and after being informed they hadn't been noticed yet, he expressed his satisfaction and picked up a small stone. Fake hurled the stone toward the goblins with enough force to instantly knock one of them to the ground. As the second assailant charged with a club, the protagonist quickly drew his sword and struck him down. It only took a few moments for him to grasp the situation. When I commented on his incredible strength, he dismissed it as an exaggeration, explaining that his experience gathering materials alone made these battles second nature to him. Lisa turned to the protagonist with a blush, telling him he was incredible, which left him flustered as he offered his thanks. It appeared that Lady Ali was enjoying the display, but she quickly changed the subject to request a further demonstration of their tactics before they returned to the workshop. After carefully analyzing their combat techniques, he determined that Ivis's speed required a light, short blade, whereas Vezor's preference for heavy weapons made a longsword the ideal choice. Before Fake could begin his work, he needed to understand their requirements more clearly. So upon returning to the workshop, he immediately asked E. West for his opinion on the short sword. He rejected the weapon for being both too long and too heavy, leading the protagonist to ask for his thoughts on daggers, but he found their blade length to be far too short. He mentioned that the weight felt ideal, leading Fakes to realize that a shorter, more lightweight blade was exactly what he needed. Turning to Vaser for his input, the protagonist was told that the sword's sheer weight would undoubtedly overwhelm any enemy in its path. He approached the group to thank them for their time, now possessing a clear vision for their ideal weapon, and followed up by inquiring about the final cost of the commission. Reflecting on the custom request and the quality of the materials, he didn't want to undervalue his craftsmanship, yet he remained mindful that these were his very first clients. The protagonist proposed a strategy based on the final weapon options, noting that Ivis's gear would cost 40,000 crowns while Veser's would be 60,000. Wazer remarked that the cost was even lower than he'd anticipated, but Fake clarified that this price factored in the trade-in of their old weapons for scrap. Otherwise, the total would increase by another 40,000 crowns. He expressed his understanding, noting that parting with his old weapon was a small price to pay for such a significant discount. With the agreement settled, Fakes promised that their weapons would be ready by the start of the next auction. He thanked them for their time, and the group expressed their mutual gratitude, eagerly awaiting the results of his craftsmanship. Fakes assured them that everything was in order for his start the following day, and he thanked them for their well wishes. As a new day dawned, the protagonist returned to the forge, deciding his first task would be crafting a weapon for Ivis. His weapon was a unique hybrid, blending the nimble weight of a dagger with the extended reach of a short sword. Limiting the amount of magic used during the forging process is an option, though it would result in a weapon with a significantly shorter lifespan. With many more battles ahead for the two partners, Ivis and Vezor need a weapon they can fully depend on, requiring him to put in significant effort to ensure its quality. After melting the ore and forging an iron plate, He completed the mold and began casting his spell. They shouldn't be overused, as they are primarily intended for repairing the magic code. Although a hammer blow could easily break them, the charms ensure that restoring them is a simple process. By repeating this process, the magic code becomes more deeply integrated into the blade, much like how human muscles grow stronger after being pushed to their limits. With the shaping complete, it was time for the firing process, and he immediately began heating the object. After the burning process concluded, he surveyed the result and, satisfied that it was exactly what he needed, began the sharpening phase. While he usually sharpens tools based on intuition, he knew this task required extra precision, and once the edge was finished, he began crafting the handles. Afterward, he stepped outside to test the weapon and found it surprisingly sharp, even before applying any charms to further enhance its edge. He hoped the weapon would help Iwasu reach the top while preserving his cheerful spirit. And before long, the blade was finally complete. Awasa's sword was revealed to be single-edged, bearing a resemblance to a falcio. Faye decided that a single sharpened side would be more than enough for his blade. Measuring shorter than a sword but weighing slightly more than a dagger, the medium-sized blade was exactly what he had been looking for. Feeling completely drained, Faye realized that once the knives were finished, half the work would be done. He hadn't expected a single commission to be so taxing, but as this was his first custom sword, he hoped Ivis would be satisfied with the final product. Just then, a knock sounded at the door as Alicia asked to enter. After he welcomed her in, she noted his clear dedication to the task and asked if he had finished any part of the order yet. He explained that he had decided to start by crafting a weapon and offered her a look, to which she remarked that the blade perfectly combined raw power with magical elegance. Alicia complimented the craftsmanship, calling it a true work of art, which Twitchy appreciated as he admitted that forging the sword alone had left him completely exhausted. She then explained that her concern for his well-being was the reason she had come to check on him. After inquiring about the time, the protagonist realized that since starting that morning, the entire forging process had taken roughly 5 hours. Alicia offered him something to eat, but he declined, admitting he just wanted to sleep. Seeing his exhaustion, she sat on the floor and patted her knees, inviting him to rest. Seeing how exhausted he was, she offered her lap as a pillow, and though he tried to argue out of embarrassment, she firmly insisted that he lie down and rest. Following her lead, he rested his head on her lap. But despite the comfort, his lingering anxiety made it impossible for him to truly relax. Alicia inquired about his plans for the day, and Faye explained he intended to craft a few items for sale before finishing up, saving Weezer's order for tomorrow, though Alicia suggested they remain in bed a while longer. Believing his actions would protect those he held dear, he rested his head on his beloved's lap, feeling like the happiest person in the world. As a new day dawned, Faye realized that unlike Ibis's weapon, Weezer's sword would require a significantly larger amount of magic ore. To justify the sword's higher price, he began by using earth magic to shape a wide plate mold, which he then filled with molten magic ore and left to solidify. Mirroring the technique used for the Iwasa sword, the plate is reheated, and the entire sequence of steps must be performed once more. He hammers the material into the desired shape, repeatedly reheating and reworking it to refine the form. He debated whether to enchant the sword immediately or wait for its final form, while Weezer, unlike I was, demonstrated the versatility to wield any type of blade. The protagonist decided to craft a double-edged blade for him, opting for a long and wide design to fulfill the client's specific request. Rather than just inflicting status effects, his weapon needed the power to decisively eliminate his foes. During their coordinated attacks, Ivis draws the enemy's focus while Vaesor delivers the finishing blow. Because of this, the sword required enough weight and sharpness to guarantee a kill in a single swing. He decided to integrate magical data before forging, believing that repeating this tempering process would eventually refine the sword to perfection. Arya sought to further refine his magic iron, but forging such a massive object would have been nearly impossible had he not first cast a spell on himself. After finally perfecting the shape and weight of Vaesor's sword, Faye realized it was already midday and decided to take a break, acknowledging that the task would be far more time-consuming than he had initially expected. Following the arrest, he chose to push through his work until evening, appearing completely exhausted by the time he finally finished. The sword's immense weight made it difficult to temper, and because of its length, using wind magic to sharpen the edge required far more strength than usual. Realizing the job was far more demanding than he had anticipated, the protagonist regretted not negotiating a steeper price for his services. After that, it was time for the last pass before the final enchantment. He went outside again to try the sword in action. Faye believed this sword could dispatch monsters in a single strike, as its double-edged blade and immense weight allowed it to cleave through anything in its path. To complete the process, he needed to track down the specific charms that would finally unlock Vaser's full combat potential. After a grueling day of labor in the workshop, the sword was finally finished, and he collapsed to the ground, overwhelmed by the realization that his task was complete. Eager to see their reactions, the protagonist looked forward to presenting the new weapons, while nearby, Alicia attempted to lift Weiser's sword. After she complained that the sword was far too heavy to lift, he explained that the blade had been custom forged to match Weiser's specific build and preferences, then asked her to reach out her hand to him. Faye explained that he had temporarily augmented her physical strength so she could wield the sword, and when she put his claim to the test, she successfully lifted the heavy blade. Alicia remarked on the object's immense weight, noting that only 2 people in the world possessed the skill to craft such a thing using magic ore. Faye questioned whether the claim was actually true, clearly skeptical, but he noted that while she had encountered many blacksmiths, only a rare few possessed the skill to create something of that caliber. Alicia offered him a warm smile and praised his exceptional blacksmithing skills, though the protagonist humbly noted that he still had much to learn. After observing that he had been working in the shop for 2 days straight, she invited him to dinner. He readily agreed, admitting he was famished, and she told him he could eat as much as he liked. Returning to the forge to meet Morgan, the knight inquired about the workshop's general purpose, though the man seemed puzzled by the question. He explained that he had summoned him to discuss the sword he was entrusted with, demanding to know why the craftsmanship was so lackluster. Morgan was instantly skeptical, questioning if there could truly be any issue with such a high-quality enchanted weapon. He explained that every knight in his guild was provided with an enchanted blade, a feat that required the forge to operate almost non-stop through immense effort. Morgan explained that the forge was already operating at full capacity, noting that the craft demands immense resources and physical endurance. He even suggested that the knights should be taught to handle their blades with more care. The knight then inquired if it was indeed their forge that had committed to providing monthly weapon shipments under an agreement made 3 years prior, which Morgan confirmed was accurate. Once Faker had settled into the palace, they forced him to shoulder every responsibility alone, eventually restructuring the supply system into its current state to further increase his hardship. The boy's ability to overcome these challenges infuriated the man, prompting him to negotiate a more frequent weapon supply with the knights. The knight noted that prior to this arrangement, deliveries were only made once every 3 to 6 months. The blonde warned that they would sever ties with the forge if the quality of the swords didn't improve, leaving Morgan deeply offended by the harsh description of his work as disgusting. The man asked for clarification, prompting the knight to explain that the sword he was currently forging was nowhere near the quality of the one he had previously seen. The knight began to suspect that every high-quality sword they had previously been supplied with was actually a forgery. The blonde explained that none of their swords were combat-ready until the charms were repaired, though Morgan noted they were already working through their holidays and might simply be looking for a pay raise. The knights warned that if weapons of such poor quality continued to be supplied, their salaries might be reduced, presenting sample swords that still bore counterfeit charms as evidence. Morgan questioned if the item was truly a fake's charm, remarking that he couldn't even look at such low-quality work, a statement that left the knight completely stunned. The blonde claimed that even he, a man normally unable to perceive magic code, could see it, leaving the other to wonder how he dared to speak with such insolence. Morgan spread his arms wide and sighed heavily before turning to the knight captain, noting that he seemed to be unaware. He explained that, unlike his companion, he lacked the ability to perceive magic code, which meant he couldn't distinguish between a well-crafted script and a poorly made one. Morgan began to explain that fake spell was so fundamentally flawed it was beyond any hope of repair. The man explained that these spells were uniquely vile, noting that any blacksmith who looked upon them would be overcome by such intense revulsion that they would be unable to continue their work. Morgan recalled a harsh memory from a year after the man began blacksmithing, remembering how he had told him he lacked talent, only for the man to apologize and claim he was still adjusting to the craft. The man yelled that he was to remain in the workshop every day to enchant all the swords alone, and since that moment, Morgan hadn't spared the place a single glance, nor did he ever intend to. The knight questioned if he truly meant all of them, and after he confirmed his statement, the blonde woman asked if he was implying that every blacksmith had only secured their position through connections and was essentially useless. Morgan admitted that while he and his peers had secured their roles as court blacksmiths through connections, their genuine talent still set them far apart from ordinary people. The knight conceded that it was enough, requesting only that the swords be enchanted so they could finally be put to use. After the blonde dismissed him, Morgan left the office feeling like a selfish person, reflecting on how he only ever made one-sided demands. Despite their relentless work ethic, he had never encountered anyone so reckless, leading him to believe the nation was headed for ruin. Relieved to have avoided the disastrous fate of becoming that man's personal blacksmith, he decided to call it a day. Feeling exhausted, he left the remaining work to others so he could finally get some rest. Eventually, the knight gathered all the blacksmiths into a single room and bluntly informed them that they were all talentless. Morgan exchanged glances with the other blacksmiths before asking for clarification, revealing that they were actually official court blacksmiths. He marveled at the blonde's audacity to speak so boldly despite her lack of clarity, while the knight agreed to withhold his report to the other department if they could successfully prove their results. He had originally intended to have his sword inspected, but he was stunned when they returned a pathetic mockery of his weapon. Appalled by their audacity, he didn't hesitate to call them out for their behavior. He overwhelmed them with his power, causing several members of the Kuznetsov family to collapse, and as he began to investigate their affairs, more of their hidden crimes were brought to light. It seemed that many chefs had abandoned the establishment, with none lasting longer than a year, and this rapid exodus of specialists was entirely Morgan's fault. He admitted to the high turnover rate, but attributed it entirely to a perceived lack of courage in today's youth. Dismissing the claims as false, the knight explained that the workshop head had actually been belittling his new subordinates, before suddenly lunging forward to grab Morgan by the collar. The blonde accused him of talking behind his back, but the man clarified that he wasn't mocking anyone. He was simply conducting their training. The knight noted that the boy hadn't even had a day off, having spent the entire night in the forge, and after inquiring about the training, he remarked that the man was more of a natural torturer than a blacksmith. Morgan began to deny the accusations, but this only intensified the knight's anger, prompting him to silence Morgan with a sharp command and a wave of his hand. With a single punch, the blonde man knocked him to the ground, leading Morgan to question if he truly believed such violence was justified. The knight questioned how many master blacksmiths had been lost because of his actions, making it clear that his own suffering was insignificant by comparison. The blonde woman stated that the man was obligated to return, but he wasn't the only one. He intended to retrieve every member of the Kuznetsov family they had lost. He demanded that every current blacksmith crawl on their knees to apologize to those they had driven away, even offering several ways to make amends before asking if his terms were understood. After overhearing that he was being dismissed, Morgan immediately asked for confirmation, but the knight loudly retorted that the situation should have been obvious. Morgan refused to submit or kneel, leading the blonde to threaten everyone with termination if they weren't returned, especially since the man's family had already been fully informed of the situation. The knight noted that they seemed intent on distancing themselves from him, leaving Morgan in a state of disbelief. He realized he was no longer the court blacksmith, and without his titles, he felt he had nothing left to live for. The blonde man promised that if they successfully rescued all the blacksmiths, he would grant them entry into the Knight Corps, though they would first have to survive a period of grueling training. Deciding to set the matter aside for now, the knight departed to retrieve Kuznetsov, leaving the man to wonder how he had ended up in this predicament. Meanwhile at the market, the protagonist handed the men their completed swords and asked for their honest feedback. He remarked that the sword's length was ideal, and its build surprisingly light, yet he could still sense the immense power it contained. The protagonist explained that because his equipment had been tailored specifically to his fighting style, it wasn't well suited for direct head-on confrontations. Faye noted that despite his efforts to maximize the weapon's durability, the blade still might not withstand a direct clash with a powerful opponent like Weezer, necessitating a more cautious approach. Iva confirmed he understood the situation and expressed his gratitude, noting that as long as he fought as he normally did, they shouldn't encounter any problems. Weather also lifted the blade, leaving the protagonist amazed that he could support such weight with just one hand, as he checked to see how he was doing. Satisfied with the weight, the Beastman gave his approval, prompting Fakes to express his relief and ask about the length, which the man confirmed was also correct. Wazer could hardly believe how perfect everything was, as every detail aligned exactly with his desires. For the first time, he held a sword that felt like a natural extension of his own hands. Fakes explained that his technique focuses on a single lethal blow, noting how their combat styles complement each other. While Ivis lures the target in, Visor delivers the finishing strike, a strategy Visor agreed with as he expressed his appreciation for the sword. The protagonist reassured him that there was no need for concern, encouraging him to use the item freely since he could always repair it, a task that brought him the greatest joy as a blacksmith. He then moved to finalize the settlement, calling for the agreed-upon payment and the sword while expressing his satisfaction with their successful transaction. The sword he received as payment was in excellent condition, requiring only a minor adjustment to its magic code before it could be put up for sale. The group shared their plans to take the promotion exam soon, confident that their current skills would guarantee their success. Even without that edge, their new swords felt so natural that it was as if they had been wielding them for years. Fakes expressed his relief, urging them to remain cautious and stay safe. He added that if they failed the test while using his weapon, he would begin to doubt his own craftsmanship. Confident in their success, the young man assured the group they would pass, while Vizer vowed to become a swordsman worthy of his blade with his comrades' full support. Following their departure, Alicia noted how well everything had gone and mentioned their client's satisfaction. The protagonist agreed, expressing his relief that the swords were such a success. Optimistic about their chances, she expressed her belief that they would surely succeed, especially since they were now equipped with his weapon. Eventually, she announced that the enchantment was complete, noting that all the swords were now in excellent condition. Just then, a girl approached the counter and was invited to test any of the swords, but she simply pointed toward him and expressed her desire to offer her support. The group watched in silence as the girl inquired about the price, but after being told the sword would cost 50,000 crowns, she immediately asked if he could lower the price. He quickly considered the possibility of giving it to her for 40,000, just as she approached him and offered to do him a favor in return. Fakes claimed he couldn't lower the price much further, suggesting a drop to 40,000, but Alice immediately pointed out that his starting price was only 50,000 crowns. The girl noted that given its high quality, the item was a great bargain even at its original price. Turning to Alice, the stranger questioned if she was truly a girl. Though Alice confirmed she was and asked for an explanation, the stranger simply noted that everything had become clear to her. After agreeing to the terms, the client purchased the sword for 50,000 crowns, and while the protagonist thanked her before she departed, it was clear that Alicia was visibly upset. Fake asked her for an explanation, but she countered by questioning his interest in her figure. Even though he denied it, she insisted she had caught him staring. He reasoned that his reaction was driven by simple instinct rather than a specific preference, even as he caught himself stealing a glance. After selling 2 F-rank swords and daggers to the rookie adventurers, they brought in 180,000 crowns for the morning and resolved to keep up the same pace. After some time, a street vendor named Rick approached the counter, noting that it had been a while since they last saw each other. The man explained that his swords and daggers had sold out quickly in the neighboring city thanks to his successful marketing, and he expected a new surge of customers to arrive soon. After confirming the details, the protagonist expressed his gratitude for the recommendation, while the merchant noted that their stock was popular with everyone from common adventurers to elite knights. He added that they had begun boasting to the other knights, even asking if they were impressed by the display. The protagonist questioned why knights weren't supplied with weapons by their lords, noting that this custom mirrored the exact system used in his homeland, the Revenold Empire. This was why they were required to perform mass weapon enchantments every single week. The merchant conceded the point, though the weapons he provided were far from high quality, as high-ranking knights typically commission their own personal armaments. Returning once more, he inquired about their inventory of premium weapons, to which Fake clarified they had 10 items available, consisting of both swords and daggers. Impressed by the exceptional quality, the merchant decided to purchase the entire stock, leading the imposter to thank him for the deal just as the blonde man learned his total would be 800,000. Explaining that he typically buys in bulk, the merchant requested a discount and put forward an offer of 700,000. The protagonist argued that the price remained far too low, expressing concern that it would negatively impact his business. The imposter proposed an alternative, suggesting that by adding some lower-quality swords and daggers, the total would reach 760,000. Accepting the proposal, the merchant packed the weapon into a wooden crate before explaining that he would be away on a long journey and unable to visit for quite some time. The protagonist expressed his disappointment at the news, to which the blonde man replied that his student would be visiting in a week's time in his stead. He explained that a girl named Alm would be arriving and requested a variety of weapons in different qualities, promising to purchase every piece she didn't select for herself. The merchant proposed a test to see if she could accurately judge the weapon's quality, and the protagonist agreed to the arrangement. The blonde specified that 10 top-tier swords and daggers, as well as several lower-quality items, needed to be ready for sale by that day, before asking if the order could be completed. The protagonist readily agreed to prepare for her arrival, prompting the merchant to mention that a servant would accompany her so he could recognize her instantly. Alicia leaned in and quietly asked if he was certain, reminding him that he only had a week to finish everything. The protagonist assured her that he was well adjusted to the task and could finish within a week, leading her to caution him against overexerting himself. After the merchant inquired about the price, the seller requested 1.5 million, but the merchant immediately countered with an offer of 1.3 million. Stunned by the proposal, the protagonist questioned if he was truly serious, but Alicia quickly interjected to argue that the offer was far too low to be viable. After they established a minimum price of $1,450,000 with the protagonist's backing, the merchant finally conceded to a payment of $1,400,000. Fake initially estimated the cost to be $1.4 million, but the girl firmly insisted on a price of $1.45 million, citing their additional agreement to help train the student. Agreeing with her assessment, the merchant accepted the terms and the price, leading the young genius to express his gratitude and confirm the arrangements for the student's arrival. Once the visitor departed, Fake thanked Alicia, who teased him for being far too generous with his discounts as usual. However, he simply felt relieved knowing his swords were actually being put to good use. She expressed her understanding of his sentiment, yet maintained that his blades were far too precious to undervalue, insisting that his payment reflect the true level of his skill. Flustered by her remark, he acknowledged the lesson and promised to avoid making the same mistake again. Alicia immediately inquired about the apprentice, prompting the Fake to explain that it is standard practice for blacksmiths to train others and work collaboratively. She questioned whether he truly wanted a female student, prompting him to immediately ask why her gender even mattered. He explained that since he possesses magic of every attribute, he has been handling all the workshop's tasks alone, but he now seeks an apprentice to help distribute the workload, especially when managing large batches of orders. Gripping her hands with excitement, the protagonist explained his new idea and proposed that she become his student. The young man was already daydreaming about his future with Alicia, picturing the fun they would have together, and looking forward to seeing her in her work uniform. When he asked for her opinion on the idea, she became flustered and sheepishly closed her eyes. Alicia apologized to the boy, humbly claiming that her magical skills were far inferior to his own. Crossing his arms in agreement, the protagonist suggested that her ability to perceive magical objects might make her a natural at blacksmithing, though the craft proved to be far more complex than he initially thought. Feeling frustrated, the girl realized she would have accepted the offer instantly if it were truly an option. Alicia was filled with anxiety, fearing that if Fake took on another apprentice, the two of them would spend every day working side by side in the workshop. Startled by her sudden scream, the boy called out to her, asking what was wrong. Visibly trembling, Alicia asked the young man to refrain from taking any female students, and he assured her that he understood. Alicia asked the boy where he had acquired his blacksmithing skills, prompting him to reflect on his past. Fakes explained that he was originally from a village where his adoptive parents, both blacksmiths, had taken him in from the streets and taught him their trade. Staring at his hands, the boy realized they were no longer in their original world. When the girl asked what he meant by being picked up, he explained that his biological parents had abandoned him as a child, leaving him to grow up as an orphan. Noticing Alicia's distress, Fate told her not to worry, explaining that he had been far too young at the time to remember the faces of those people. Smiling at him, she remarked that it was her lucky day since she had managed to learn a bit more about him. The young man offered a gentle smile, clearly moved by those kind words. The girl celebrated their luck after selling out of everything, and the man agreed that staying open late had definitely been worth the effort. Their conversation was cut short when a group of adventurers called out, waving their hands to greet him. Wearing a forced smile, he asked his friends if they had passed the exam, and after they confirmed their success, he offered his praise while inquiring about their specific results. They joyfully announced that they had passed the exam and reached rank D, expressing their gratitude to the young man for the weapon he provided. Fakir and Alicia exchanged glances as the man congratulated them on their progress, expressing his pleasure in being able to help. He remarked that they must be quite grateful, as his lightweight and efficient weapon had brought them significantly closer to achieving rank C. Smiling, the protagonist explained that their success wasn't due to the weapon alone. Despite having only recently acquired it, their rapid mastery and personal skills were what ultimately allowed them to pass the exam. Though they were prepared to turn him down, he assured them they could always return if they ever needed another weapon. Fake added that he would attempt to source higher quality magic steel, as he felt the current metal was inadequate for their skill level. The adventurer promised to recommend them to their companions, prompting the young man to offer his thanks and wish them the best of luck. The heroes exchanged final waves, sharing a mutual hope to cross paths again in the near future. Watching them move on, the protagonist felt proud to see those wielding his handcrafted weapons reaching the top, and as he vowed not to be overshadowed by their success, Alicia offered him her full support. Back at the estate, the protagonist filed a report confirming a total profit of 1.2 million crowns and accepted a specific request regarding a merchant's private order. The young man explained that as more adventurers began frequenting the shop, his products were gradually starting to gain recognition. The man asked how he was faring, and he confirmed that he was doing just fine. The estate owner somberly admitted that his expertise was beyond any doubt. The man fell silent, prompting the other to notice his hesitation and ask what was wrong. The Duke declined, explaining that a letter had arrived for the boy as he handed over an envelope. Taking the envelope, he absent-mindedly asked if it had come from Leventra. The man replied that he had also received a letter regarding a blacksmith's order, noting how much the news had surprised him. After the Duke asked him to take the letter, the young man agreed, adding that he was prepared to forge a reply immediately if the situation required it. After expressing his gratitude and vowing to succeed, the protagonist headed back to his room, though he felt a lingering sense of doubt since the command had come directly from Levert. As he recalled the customer, the young man realized that satisfying him would be a difficult challenge. The next morning, the young man observed the guest as Levert welcomed Faye with a warm embrace. Levert expressed his appreciation for the young man's initiative in placing the order, while the protagonist remained preoccupied with his personal space as he was asked what kind of weapon he required. Picking up a small chest, the customer used magic to open it and revealed a handkerchief, which he then presented for the young man to inspect. Upon noticing the metal, the protagonist used his light to examine it, wondering if it was the magical iron of the area. The man nodded in agreement, explaining that this was precisely why he had sought him out. He considered the nature of magical iron drops, realizing that high-level monsters didn't always guarantee better loot. Since it was entirely down to luck, even a lowly goblin could potentially yield the precious material. He reflected on how the hope for a lucky break drives adventurers to hunt day after day, while Louitre expressed satisfaction with their agreement and inquired about the second magical material, Verea. The customer admitted his skills might be lacking compared to the quality of the ore, but he welcomed the rare opportunity to test his craftsmanship on such a metal, a request the young man accepted. The protagonist reflected on the rarity of Iria, noting that weapons forged from it were typically kept as prized family heirlooms, but his thoughts were soon interrupted when the customer revealed he had even more to show him. As the man opened the chest, the protagonist was met with an astonishing sight. Inside the chest lay the dragon's very own claw and fang. The client confirmed that the intruder had trespassed on their property, leading them to eliminate him and harvest his ears, claws, and fangs. Fuming, he explained that this was the exact reason he had approached the man for the order. The protagonist remarked that defeating a dragon is no small feat, inquiring if he had managed to do so single-handedly. Refusing to take solo credit, the customer explained that defeating such a foe alone was impossible, emphasizing that victory was only achieved through his combined efforts with the knights. The protagonist remarked that he had secured an incredible reward as a result of his victory. The young man explained that for any blacksmith, the opportunity to craft a weapon from such rare materials was the ultimate reward. The customer offered the smile, and I responded by expressing my satisfaction with the blacksmith's newfound inspiration. Cosnet proposed using Urea as the foundation, supplementing the remaining volume with Verea. The young man realized that bringing Verea along would be a challenge, especially since he lacked the necessary space to forge weapons. When the protagonist questioned the inclusion of the dragon materials, the customer confirmed his hunch, explaining that the fangs and coke were intended to compensate for the missing components and elevate the final quality. He agreed to the request, but cautioned that the final product would be inferior to a pure alloy, asking if he was still willing to forge the sword with the materials on hand. With a frustrated sigh, Leverts acknowledged the situation and admitted that a compromise was now unavoidable. Placing a hand on the blacksmith, the customer expressed his high expectations, and the young man assured him he wouldn't disappoint. As he surveyed the materials, the boy began to wonder if this was the inevitable fate of every blacksmith. Delighted by the sight of so many rare materials, the protagonist felt a surge of anticipation, eager to finally get to work. The blacksmith inquired about the specific type of weapon he wanted him to forge. Levert produced a knife and a sword, offering both weapons to the protagonist. As he handed over the weapon, he requested that its replacement be crafted in the exact same shape. Unsheathing the sword, Fake examined the blade, which was rumored to be a rare fusion of Vierrier and Sirea materials. The young man explained how the blade had been meticulously forged and enchanted to the highest level, prompting the customer to agree and request a superior weapon crafted from a combination of dragon materials and iron. After inspecting the sword, he asked for permission to cast an inichara on it, and the customer agreed, trusting his instincts to enhance the weapon's quality. Lever specified that the weight, length, and shape should be tailored to his personal preference. Acknowledging the request, the protagonist promised to forge a blade that would fully satisfy the customer's expectations. The customer took a seat to observe the process as the blacksmith began melting and blending the two different metals. Following that, the protagonist stuck to the usual plan, and the process remained straightforward. The bowl yielded a piece of metal that was fused together flawlessly. The protagonist realized that more challenges lay ahead, as the dragon's fang from Cocotte required a precise melting and mixing process. As he held the fang and claw, the young man felt a faint, rhythmic warmth pulsing within them, a sensation that struck him as deeply unusual. The customer remained silent, watching closely as the man carefully inspected the materials. Placing the claw and fang into the bowl, he realized the fire had no effect on them, as dragons are naturally resistant to extreme heat. The young man realized he needed to calibrate the magical flow and increase the heat to the necessary intensity. By channeling his magic, the man finally succeeded in shape-shifting, causing his claws and fangs to soften and dissolve. Caught off guard, Levert admitted he hadn't expected him to uncover the truth so soon. The customer remarked that he expected nothing less, noting that while most blacksmiths avoid dragon materials entirely, the man's ability to work with them proved he was a true master of his craft. As he continued to melt the materials, he confirmed that they had finally achieved a complete fusion. He took a container of molten metal, intending to combine it with raw dragon components. After pouring the molten metal, the protagonist began stirring the mixture together. Letting out a sigh of relief, the young man announced that the synthesis of every material's magical properties was a success. Surprised by the quality of the work, the customer offered his praise, prompting the man to thank him while explaining that he was just starting to give the project its proper shape. However, since it was far from finished, he asked if the customer would like to stay and observe the process. Acknowledging that opportunities to learn from such a master are rare, the customer agreed and asked to stay until the very end to witness the invaluable process. He gave a nod of agreement and immediately returned to his tasks. He began shaping the material with his hammer, employing a standard forging algorithm while carefully monitoring the magical indicators. Although the magical metal and dragon components have been compressed together, their essences remain out of sync, leaving the internal structure fragmented despite its solid appearance. As he focused on molding the sword into its final shape, utilizing this advantage, he successfully wove the magical currents together. Once the alloy solidified, he intentionally broke its structure to rebuild it from scratch, knowing this was the only way to truly temper the steel. Maintaining his focus, the young man continued to work at the forge with unwavering dedication. The customer stood by in silence, observing the man as he focused on his task. The task ended up taking the entire day, forcing them to postpone the rest until the following morning. When morning arrived, the customer who had stayed the night was already at the anvil, ready to begin his work. Although the blade's form was complete, it still required testing before the final sharpening could begin. Since symmetry is vital for a double-edged blade, he carefully inspected the weapon to ensure its balance was flawless. The next stage of the process involved crafting a handle out of air metal. After crafting a hilt, the protagonist carefully secured it to the blade. Presenting the newly forged blade, the protagonist invited his customer to take it for a test run before he applied the final modifications. Levert picked up the blade and examined it for a moment before testing its weight with a swing. He continued to swing the blade, testing its weight and handling in motion. After coming to a halt, the customer turned toward the blacksmith and offered a smile. The protagonist inquired about his opinion on the sword, and he responded that it was truly beautiful, marveling at how such a perfect replica could be so flawless after only one forging. Clearly satisfied with the result, he suggested they proceed to the final stage of processing. The customer marveled at the man's wind magic, noting that mastering every element was necessary to reach such a high level of forging, to which the blacksmith replied that his years of training had certainly not been in vain. Announcing that the sharpening was complete, the protagonist moved on to the final enchantments, which Faye expected would be modified versions of the charms on Levert's sword, tailored for the magical metal Iria. Despite his consistent failure to deliver, the blacksmith kept a smile on his face as the customer looked on in silence. With his blade prepared, Levert followed through with another strike. The customer praised the sword's ergonomic grip and efficient magic conductivity, noting that its spellcasting precision was truly exceptional, which left the young man pleased that Levert held the weapon in such high regard. When the customer admitted he wouldn't be able to fix the blade himself, the blacksmith explained that the urea alloy would keep it in top condition for at least 2 months, leading the impressed man to take his hand and praise his work as truly miraculous. Seeking to end the encounter, the protagonist pulled his hand back. After thanking the blacksmith, the customer asked to settle the payment. Levert offered a payment of 5 million brackets, but the protagonist declined, feeling the sum was far too high. After explaining that he had provided the materials and already grasped the sword's design, the young man requested 300,000 crowns for his work. Levert explained that his mastery over these complex materials was a rare skill, justifying why his iron weaponry cost 10 times the standard price. The customer requested the chest, noting that the full payment was already inside along with the items. The protagonist explained that these were incredibly rare dungeon artifacts, and felt he couldn't accept something so valuable, but the customer insisted the blade was worth the price. The customer mentioned that a sword forged from urea material is formidable enough to rival weapons crafted from Lee's steel. Levert expressed his desire to continue their partnership, noting that his skills as a blacksmith would be a valuable asset in the future. An offer the protagonist gratefully accepted. Expressing his gratitude once more, the man promised to become a warrior worthy of the blacksmith's exceptional craftsmanship. She praised the impostor's craftsmanship, noting that the sword delivered to Levitra met every requirement, especially considering the challenge of working with the Irene metal and dragon materials. Alicia cheerfully remarked that even her father was impressed, expressing her confidence that he would soon come to fully recognize his abilities. Faye asked for confirmation and he agreed, expressing hope that it would one day become a reality if he were truly recognized. He struggled to understand how their dynamic would truly change, as he had only ever seen himself as a difficult fiancé used to ward off other suitors. The young man realized that as long as he could remain useful to Alice, he would be more than happy for things to stay this way forever. The boy was uncertain how much longer they could successfully maintain their deception of Lord Goral. The young man believed his place in her life would eventually reach its end once she found someone who truly loved her. The protagonist realized that everything began with Alice's compassion, as she was the only one who felt sorry for him while he was being ridiculed by everyone else. Putting the matter aside, the young man threw himself into blacksmithing, desperately seeking a sense of recognition that was admittedly quite childish. Observing his somber mood, she asked if he was feeling all right or simply exhausted from forging the sword, though he only offered a sad smile and insisted he was fine. The protagonist noted that a student named Riga Almi was due to arrive next week, and despite having several other client orders pending, he hadn't yet started working. This upset the girl, who felt he had already pushed himself to the limit on his last assignment. The boy explained that since his hobby provided an income, he had no reason to complain. Even when Alicia urged him to take a break, he insisted that he wasn't tired. Expressing her concern for his well-being, she asked him to take the rest of the week to rest. Since they weren't in any rush, the young man suggested a change of pace, proposing they go out for a nice meal together. She agreed, but he remained completely unaware of what was waiting for him just around the corner. Driven by an unquenchable desire to forge exceptional weapons, he sought for his blades to reach as many owners as possible, viewing this as his unshakable life's purpose and the true calling of a dedicated blacksmith. Standing in his office, the owner reflected on the customer who had expressed gratitude for the opportunity to commission replica weaponry. Levert explained that the magical iron, the metal from the Varea claw, and the dragon's fang had successfully merged into a single blade, fulfilling every one of his expectations. Baffled, the Duke questioned whether it was truly possible to craft such a blade. The man questioned the details of their agreement, asking why a fake was necessary when both blacksmiths vying for his daughter's hand were masters of their craft. He explained that Lady Alicia's high praise had inspired him to push his limits and see what he was truly capable of as an artisan. The young man noted that processing and shaping these materials was a difficult undertaking for him. As a fellow blacksmith, the Duke expressed his admiration for the man's talent, realizing exactly why Alicia had chosen him over everyone else. Snapping out of his reflections on past conversations, the man turned around. A large chest sat prominently within the room. Approaching the chest, she opened it and gazed at the sword inside. The man observed him, lost in his own reflections. Grell was convinced that he alone possessed the ability to resolve the situation. Alicia expressed her frustration to Faye, noting that he was always busy in the forge preparing for the market, so the maid suggested she simply watch him while he worked. She admitted she might become a distraction since he tends to ignore her when he's focused, but he reassured her that he was counting on her support. After knocking on the workshop door and being granted entry, the girl informed the protagonist that something terrible had happened to the lady, prompting him to urgently ask for more information. She explained that Alicia was eager to share some tea and sweets with him, and upon hearing this, he immediately set aside his work to join her. Following a 2-week hiatus, the heroes returned to the tent and settled into their usual spots to prepare for the tasks ahead. As was their routine, the couple sorted the merchandise by quality and set aside a batch specifically for the magic students. To meet the merchant's request, the protagonist forged a variety of weapons, expanding their selection of swords and daggers to draw in more customers. Alicia remarked on how useful Lever's gift had been, noting that the box allowed the young man to carry significantly more items. As the crowd went about their business, the shouts of adventurers near a shop caught the group's attention, leading them to approach the heroes. The boys inquired if this was the blacksmith Fiki's shop, and once confirmed, the adventurer explained that he had previously acquired one of the smith's swords through a traveling merchant. He explained that this was the reason for his personal visit, allowing his men to test the sword to demonstrate its superior quality and perfect handling to the eager crowd. Clearly pleased by the compliment, the protagonist expressed his sincere gratitude. Although he suspected the traveling merchant's promise to promote his products was a scam, he was stunned when customers began appearing almost immediately. After selecting their equipment, the group requested to purchase several daggers and swords. After expressing his gratitude for the purchase, the protagonist stated the final price. Despite the discounted price, selling the counterfeit weapons still netted 200,000 gold, as 3 buyers fortunately appeared first thing that morning. Before long, a new group of clients made their appearance. Seeing the group of friends together reminded the protagonist of the patrons who had once praised his forged blades and his tavern. Word of Evis's strength had begun to spread, drawing several people to the scene. Word traveled quickly through the merchants, and by midday, the shop was already packed with people. The girl marveled at the endless stream of customers, while the man agreed, attributing their sudden popularity to the publicity Riga had provided. She agreed with the assessment and urged the student to move quickly, noting that their supply of blades was nearly exhausted. Noticing a significant increase in the crowd compared to his last visit, the protagonist realized that even if people were only browsing, the growing interest was a promising sign. The man with the mustache requested 2 daggers and a sword from the protagonist, prompting Alicia to thank him for the purchase. He spent hours pondering how to avoid selling off their stock, but as the girl noted the decline in visitors, they turned around to find the very people they had been expecting. Up ahead, a gathering of adventurers came into view, with the student Riga Alme standing among them. The exceptionally beautiful Alma looked forward, questioning if the building ahead was indeed the shop. Meeting the girl left the protagonist feeling both flustered and bewildered. Alma greeted the man, wishing him a pleasant day and introducing herself before asking if he was an imposter. He confirmed he was, and asked if she was a student of Rega. With a light laugh, she explained that she was there to take his place for the day, just as her teacher had previously informed him. Alma mentioned that her teacher had praised the boy's exceptional craftsmanship, yet he remained embarrassed and skeptical of the high praise. Alicia cast a subtle, sideways glance toward the guest. Clearly perplexed, the protagonist explained that he had simply brought the weapon for their inspection, while Alicia kept her eyes fixed on him. The young man presented a variety of items he had prepared and invited them to take their pick, expressing his appreciation as they did so. The young man questioned whether Alm would notice if he mixed high-quality items with inferior ones. Taking hold of the sword, she carefully examined its surface to determine its composition. Riga requested 10 swords and 10 daggers, declining any further equipment. Her companions were stunned that she could identify the superior items, as she had unerringly chosen the best despite their similar appearance. Flashing a smile, the young man informed the girl that the total price would come to 1,450,000 crowns. A heavy silence settled as the protagonist waited for his compensation, but the girl simply brought her fingers to her mouth and questioned the nature of the payment. Riga, a student, clung to his hand while asking for a discount. The young man was left completely bewildered, met only by Alma's innocent smile and Alicia's look of sheer astonishment. Claiming her status as a regular, the girl continued to press for a small discount, though the man tried his best to decline. The young man noticed her attempt at seduction, but he was certain she had targeted the wrong person. Reflecting on his love for Alicia, he realized that her behavior, however unusual, didn't actually repel him. Sensing that she might be disappointed in him, a thought he found truly unbearable, the protagonist quickly withdrew his hand. Crossing his arms in defiance, the young man stood his ground and refused, even after they insisted this was the final amount. Visibly frustrated that her charms had failed, she acknowledged the man's boldness and agreed to settle the payment. The young man's satisfaction was cut short when she complimented his mastery and asked where he had worked previously. The protagonist explained that he previously worked in the Revenald Empire, noting how fortunate he felt to have relocated to his current home. Smiling, she added that their paths might cross again, choosing not to say a final goodbye. The girl blew him a kiss and hoped they would cross paths again soon, leaving the protagonist feeling self-assured in his belief that he wasn't an easy target for deception. The young man noted how fortunate they were to sell so many weapons at such a high price, but Alicia's silence quickly began to worry him. Alicia inquired whether Shiley still maintained her preference for larger men. Confused by her words, the protagonist sought clarification, prompting Alicia to explain that she was referring to Lady Alma. She caught him staring, causing the young man to fall silent as he struggled to find a response. The protagonist attempted to deny everything, but a tearful Alicia refuted his claims, insisting she had noticed the truth in the way he looked at her. Still unable to provide a clear answer, the young man could only plead for her attention, insisting that he was, in fact, a man. The protagonist explained that wild males naturally react to movement, prey, and threats, admitting he was powerless against these primal instincts. Upset, she questioned if her inability meant she was no longer worthy of attention, leading the young man to quickly reassure her that he hadn't meant it that way. Alicia suddenly reached out and clung to Fake's arm. Visibly flustered, he questioned her actions, only for her to close her eyes and ask if she could give him a hug. Alicia once again questioned whether she was truly worthy of any attention. Still holding his hand, the girl asked if he liked someone like her, but he tried to cut her off, his thoughts immediately turning to his feelings for Alicia. Realizing his preferences had been shaped by her influence, the protagonist watched as she sadly let him go. She apologized for the awkward situation she had created, but he simply reassured her that everything was fine. A quiet settled over the heroes as they finished their final trade with May, having earned a record 120,000 crowns in their most successful day at the market yet. Upon returning to the estate, the owner noted that the day's battles had gone smoothly, and the young man agreed, mentioning that a traveling merchant was responsible for several of their orders. The young man bowed and stated he was finished, but as he requested permission to take his leave, the man stopped him. Goral cast his eyes downward, remaining silent as the boy waited for a response. The man candidly admitted his admiration for the boy's success, though the young man remained utterly confused by the topic of conversation. Goral voiced his skepticism, doubting he could establish such a distribution network in a foreign country where he was a complete stranger. The protagonist attributed his success to simple luck, noting that because his current income relies heavily on the merchant, any loss of interest would cause his profits to plummet. The young man reflected on the immense support he received, particularly from those who had purchased his creations. The protagonist reflected on how Alicia's support had been the key to his remarkable growth. The man acknowledged the point but clarified that his livelihood didn't depend on the merchant alone, while the boy added that recommendations from adventurers had allowed him to steadily grow stronger over time. Rao responded, noting that this served as proof his weapon truly could be used to help others. He noted that his expertise in blacksmithing is exactly why people keep returning to him. Feeling a bit flustered, he expressed his gratitude to the man once again. Rising from his chair, the homeowner informed him that he had a favor to ask. After the young man promised to do everything in his power, the man opened a chest and retrieved his sword. Goral inquired whether the young man possessed the skill to repair the blade. The protagonist took a hold of the blade and asked for permission to examine it more closely. As the young man attempted to decipher the enchanted data on the sword, he squinted in confusion, unable to make sense of the script. The sheer intensity of the overload left the young man reeling from dizziness. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, making him feel as if an entire library had been forced into his mind all at once. He reasoned that the intense sensation from the blade meant it held far more magical information than he could currently process, and when the homeowner checked on him, he requested a moment of silence to focus. He observed that while the enchantment's structure was simple, the sheer volume of magic power poured into it was immense. Surveying the weapon, he realized it was heavily damaged, and that continuing to use it would eventually cause it to shatter. After the imposter claimed to have identified the issue, the man asked if he could repair it. He agreed, but warned that the overwhelming amount of magical data would make it impossible to fix all at once. The protagonist estimated that the repairs would take roughly a day, much to Goral's satisfaction. The man cautioned him against rushing, urging him to be thorough and precise, a request the protagonist readily accepted. Recognizing the blade's immense value to Lord Goro, the young man knew he had to balance precision with speed to return it to its owner as quickly as possible. The next day, the boy took up the sword that had once belonged to Alicia's father. Re-examining the sword's data, the young man noted that several innate symbols and entire sections were malfunctioning, requiring him to perform a precise restoration to avoid compromising the original magical structure. The protagonist soon discovered that the blade was forged from a specialized alloy of Iran and Elias iron. Judging by the quality of the materials, it was evident he was holding a true masterwork. The presence of a master's mark and an immense volume of magic meant the process would take much longer than he had initially anticipated. The protagonist realized that the person wearing the charm had clearly put in several days of sleepless effort to craft it. He acknowledged that building everything from the ground up would be a monumental task, but he was confident he could resolve the situation. His parents informed the young man that the spell had remained powerful for over a decade. While he initially suspected a specific steel alloy was responsible, he eventually dismissed the idea, realizing the result was actually due to the superior techniques of a master blacksmith. He saw this as a sign that his art could still evolve and pressed on with his work. The young man mused that if he were to ever forge such a weapon, he would ensure it was built to endure for centuries. He isn't motivated by a desire for fame or a lasting legacy in the history books. He believed this would allow his blades to continue protecting others even after his passing. Setting his wandering thoughts aside, he refocused his attention on the task at hand. By midday, the majority of the work was complete, and just as he was adding the final touches, an unexpected knock came from the door. The man invited his guest inside, where Alicia noted his work-oriented nature and inquired about the progress of the sword's repair. He explained that the work was nearly finished with only the final touches remaining, and when she expressed surprise at his speed over the last half-day, he simply noted it was a routine sword repair. Smiling as she touched the blade, she remarked that the replica was truly impressive. Alicia explained that the blade was a family heirloom, forged by her grandfather. Caught off guard, the young man inquired about her grandfather's current whereabouts. Alice clarified that he had actually passed away 10 years ago. The boy realized just how much the blade meant to Mr. Goral, a sentiment the girl shared, as he reflected on the responsibility of being asked to repair such a precious item. The boy realized that the Duke wouldn't have entrusted him with such a weapon without giving it serious thought. The girl explained that her father had attempted to repair the sword, but his failure had left him deeply troubled for a long time. Alicia explained that because her father lacked a natural talent for blacksmithing, he was unable to repair the blade he had inherited from his grandfather. Though the young man was initially caught off guard, he quickly began to understand the girl's situation. The protagonist viewed the order as a personal trial, sensing that Mr. Goral had yet to fully acknowledge his skills despite entrusting him with his blade. He realized that they truly placed their faith in him, and that this sword likely held a deeply cherished memory. The protagonist noted that his margin for error had become even slimmer, prompting the girl to wish him the best of luck. Several hours slipped by as the young man remained focused on his work following the final revision. After applying the final touches, the protagonist successfully finished the entire renovation. He carefully scrutinized every detail for flaws, unsure if his replica of the original enchantment was accurate enough despite visiting the team's quarters dozens of times. She requested to examine the sword, and while he agreed, he cautioned that her lack of magical information might make it difficult to perceive properly. Alicia took hold of the sword regardless, attempting to decipher the inscriptions etched upon it. Feeling lightheaded, the girl reassured the oblivious young man that he had done excellent work, even though she had only caught a brief glimpse of the results. Alicia explained that she could sense the emotions her grandfather had poured into the sword, making it feel as though the weapon had come alive with a surge of newfound strength. Smiling warmly, she thanked him for returning the sword and restoring the Bernasto house to its former status. With a smile, the protagonist expressed how much those words truly meant to him. The boy confidently assured them that he would deliver the sword to Mr. Goral right away. She was certain her father would react with childlike excitement, but he remained skeptical of her claim. Although the boy initially refused, the girl assured him her father could be quite kind, prompting him to recall a moment where he had witnessed that side of the man himself. Despite his initial nerves, the protagonist was now eager to see the man's reaction, while the girl urged him to head over quickly. Visibly surprised by the speed of the work, the Duke questioned if the repairs had truly been completed so quickly. The young man confirmed he had restored the blade to the best of his ability and invited the man to inspect his work, who then took the sword into his hands. After drawing the sword from its scabbard, the man kept his gaze firmly fixed on the blade. The Duke's somber expression left the man confused, prompting him to wait for an explanation. Alicia's father was genuinely taken aback as he began putting the sword through its paces. The man finally released his hold on the sword. Alicia's father attempted to decipher the data stored within the sword. As the man closed his eyes, the protagonist began to understand the heavy burden the Duke was carrying. With a weary sigh, Goral agreed that his father's sword remained exactly as it was on that day. Overwhelmed with joy, the man began to weep as he recalled the moment he first entrusted the sword to him. Keeping his eyes closed, Goral repeatedly insisted that the weapon was the exact same sword. He admitted that he never expected to witness its former glory and power once again. The Duke lowered his head in respect, acknowledging to Faye that they were truly a remarkable blacksmith. Clearly flustered, the young boy expressed his gratitude to his master. The young man offered a respectful bow, prompting the older man to call out to him. Goral recognized the protagonist, identifying him as Alicia's fiancé. Caught off guard by this, he pressed the man for confirmation once more. The Duke countered, asserting that he was the only one truly fit to care for his daughter. The protagonist had expected much more time to pass before those words were finally spoken. The young man bowed once more in gratitude, though Faye's spirits remained low. The protagonist came to terms with being a mere substitute groom for Alicia, as Gaurav patted his head and warned him against ever making his daughter unhappy. After the young man voiced his agreement, the Duke remarked on his daughter's charm and asked if the boy felt the same way. The protagonist agreed, but the man warned that if he acted on his impulses, his head would end up decorating the palisade. Though he felt a bit awkward, he sympathized with the man's perspective and agreed to allow it as long as there was mutual consent. Uncertain of how to respond, the young man could only offer a brief word of thanks, bewildered by how their conversation had shifted so abruptly from a casual chat to this unexpected development regarding the sword. The Duke urged him to continue his blacksmithing so his skills wouldn't dull, and the boy readily agreed to follow his guidance. Goral advised him to stay sharp, warning that being the sole suitor for his daughter would surely draw unwanted attention. Acknowledging the risk, the young man was finally permitted to leave. After stepping out of the office, the protagonist found himself at a loss, unsure of what his next move should be. He realized that his immediate priority was to discuss the fake engagement with Alicia. Meanwhile, the girl spent her time cleaning the materials the protagonist used for forging swords. When the young man returned to his forge, the girl greeted him, and he noticed she had taken the initiative to tidy up the workspace. After noticing she had even swept the floors, he thanked her for tidying the forge, causing her to laugh bashfully in response. Alicia inquired about her father's reaction, and the young man informed her that he was quite satisfied with the outcome of the repairs. The protagonist noted that the Duke was pleased with the outcome, news that Alicia received with genuine delight. Laughing once more, she decided to wait a while before visiting her father, as she was eager to witness his joyful reaction. With a faint melancholy smile, the young man noted that the Duke had successfully recognized him. With the agreement finalized, the protagonist was now officially set to take on the role of the girl's fiancé. This unexpected development caught Alicia completely off guard. Seeking confirmation, she asked once more if his statement was true, and if she had heard his exact words correctly. The young man nodded, signaling his agreement. Alicia erupted in a joyful shout. Thrilled that they had finally managed to succeed, she declared that they were now officially engaged, only for him to cut her off and call out. He brought up their fake engagement, confessing that he felt it was no longer right to maintain the deception. Letting the napkin slip from her hand, she pressed him to clarify exactly what he meant. Recalling his earlier conversation with the Duke, the protagonist explained that Lord Goral truly cared for Alicia, consistently prioritizing her feelings over the strict expectations of the nobility. As the Duke tested his skills at the forge and his worthiness as a suitor, the young man's spirit reminded her of that very same essence. He responded that he was speaking to him as a peer, making it clear that despite being a commoner, he supported the relationship regardless of the gap in their social standing. Visibly distressed, the young man confessed that this was the exact reason he could no longer bear to deceive him. The boys insisted that he reveal the entire truth to the master. Faye pointed out that their relationship had been completely devoid of love since the very beginning. Deeply troubled by the situation, the girl found herself completely at a loss for words. The boy remained unaware that his own words would eventually lead to such intense suffering. The young man realized his feelings for Alicia ran deeper than he had first imagined. While she, visibly distressed, began to speak. She eventually bowed to the man and began a sudden apology, attempting to justify her actions. She confessed that she had actually been deceiving him, admitting she felt deeply ashamed of her actions. Confused by her words, he asked her to clarify the details. She explained that on the day she proposed their fake engagement, all of her claims about needing a cover story or a disguise were actually lies. Alicia admitted she should have spoken up sooner, but her primary concern was actually something far more important. She confessed that she had fallen in love with the imposter. Stunned by the revelation, he listened as she admitted she had been in love with him all along. Despite her visible distress, she offered a small smile and confessed her love for him once more. Alicia admitted that she had been struggling with these feelings since the moment they first met. She explained that, at first, her interest in him was purely based on his character. Alicia justified her feelings by explaining that his smile was as radiant as the sun, noting that he couldn't possibly fathom how much she yearned to see it again. She confessed that she had fallen for his intense drive to become the best at the forge and the gentle way he laughed at her throughout their time together. He listened intently as she expressed her genuine adoration for every aspect of who he was. Closing her eyes, she offered the protagonist a bashful smile. Flustered by the directness of the confession, the young man's face turned a deep shade of red. After the protagonist asked for confirmation once more, she admitted it was true and apologized again for her constant dishonesty. Alicia bowed her head in apology, admitting that she had only dragged him into the situation because of her own selfishness. She reflected on how he constantly strove to please his father while remaining kind to her. Yet he was clearly struggling, and her own unrequited feelings had only added to his burden. He quickly pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her close. He questioned her once more about the nature of unrequited love. Though her explanation only left him more confused, he finally admitted that he reciprocated her feelings, loving her just as deeply. As he held her close, he finally confessed that she was the only one he had ever truly loved. She served as his sole source of motivation throughout his time working at the court. He confessed that her rare visits to the workshop were the only source of light in his life. Overwhelmed with emotion, the young man broke into tears, expressing that she was his only source of salvation. He explained that he had always felt she was beyond his reach, as he was merely a commoner working as a court blacksmith while she was the daughter of a duke. He admitted to struggling against his feelings and trying to keep his heart in check, yet he couldn't deny his love for her as he pulled away from the embrace. The young man clarified his intentions, stating that he wanted to be there as a genuine groom instead of just playing a part. He expressed his love for her once again, repeating the sentiment several times. Clearly flustered, the girl urged him to stop, and when the young man expressed his confusion, she explained that he shouldn't bring the topic up so frequently. Alicia admitted that her expression of pure joy actually looked quite frightening. Smiling warmly, he pulled the girl into another hug. Still holding her in his arms, The protagonist asked if they could put the past aside and start over from the beginning. The girl agreed, affirming that they were no longer just a fake bride and groom, but a genuine couple. He found himself in agreement with her. While they sat together in the forge, Alicia questioned the young man about the reasons behind his feelings for her. He remarked on her frequent visits to the forge, and she admitted that she simply enjoyed watching him at his craft. Clearly embarrassed, the protagonist confessed he'd been unaware of the situation, though he emphasized how much it truly meant to him. As they held hands, he admitted that she was one of the only people who had ever shown him genuine kindness. He credited her with saving him and helping him move forward. Yet a distressed Alicia lamented that things might have been different had she noticed the bullying at the forge sooner. He reassured her that it wasn't her fault, pointing out that she couldn't realistically be there every hour of the day. The young man recalled that the forge master usually behaved decently around Alicia, but the bruise on his cheek exposed the truth the moment she spotted it. The young man asked her to reveal when she first fell for him, and after Alicia shyly questioned his curiosity, she asked if he remembered their encounter under the tree 3 years ago. As the protagonist recalled their first meeting, the girl mentioned that her mother had passed away during that same year. Taken aback, he admitted he had never met Alicia's mother, or even wondered about her whereabouts. In response, the girl explained that her mother's final advice was for her to find her own happiness. Alicia explained that her proficiency in magic and fencing was born from duty rather than passion, having mastered them solely to meet the expectations placed upon her. Feeling weighed down by heavy thoughts, Alicia sought some fresh air by visiting her mother's favorite tree. In that very spot, the girl crossed paths with a young man wearing a friendly smile. Embarrassed by the memory, the boy recalled a time when he was still full of hope, though that optimism was replaced by despair just a few hours later. She recalled their first meeting, remembering how he had responded to her foolish question with genuine warmth and enthusiasm. Alicia admitted that his smile had stayed with her, prompting her to search for him at every ball until she finally realized she had fallen in love. Feeling flustered, the young man quickly changed the subject, asking if she had finally found the kind of work she was looking for. With a smile and a nod, the girl expressed her desire to live together with him. Alicia added that she hoped to share a life with him, laughing at the small things and facing both the good and bad times together. She expressed her desire to be by his side, witnessing firsthand the moment he finally becomes the world's greatest blacksmith. He watched her intently and listened, sensing that simply having someone to hear her out was all she really wanted. Alicia questioned if her words sounded peculiar, but the man simply offered a smile in response. The protagonist reassured her that it wasn't strange, expressing how truly happy he was that she decided to stay by his side. Over time, his dream of becoming the world's greatest blacksmith faded as his focus shifted entirely toward escaping hell, leading him to wonder if his craft was even worth maintaining if it couldn't aid in his survival. Now the protagonist realized that his true motivation was to reach the top for the sake of the person he loved. This realization didn't strike them right away, nor did it surface even after the main characters finally opened up to one another. As the couple stood in the Duke's office, the man noted that Alice had received an invitation to the ball, mirroring Fike's situation. The Duke noted that one of the 2 letters had reached him, and naturally he had already read it. As the man handed him the envelope, the boy noticed it originated from the palace blacksmith shop. The protagonist let out a sigh as he noticed Morgan was the sender, wondering why he was reaching out after so many years of silence. As he unfolded the letter from Morgan, the girl noticed the look on his face and asked about its contents. According to the letter, the guild's decline made it increasingly difficult to supply the knights with high-quality weaponry, leaving the blacksmiths to work tirelessly without rest. Standing beside the young man, he spoke a phrase into the air to hasten his comrade's return, prompting the man to look up from his paper and acknowledge the boy. The letter he received requested that he relay a message to Faye if he was still employed at the estate, offering an apology for the trouble if he had already been let go. The young man understood the situation perfectly, realizing that if he proved to be useless, he would be cast aside, exactly as the message had warned. Folding his hands, the Duke mentioned the rumors of the boy's exploitation at court, questioning if fear of enduring that treatment again was the reason for his hesitation to return. Lowering his head, he somberly confirmed that the situation would likely unfold exactly that way. He was asked directly if he intended to return for the sake of his house, with the man emphasizing that the title of court blacksmith for the Revenold Empire was a prestigious honor. He remained silent, steadily watching the man as he listened to the proposal. Fake considered the man's reasoning and realized that joining the Duke's household made sense, as his title of Imperial Blacksmith would bring great prestige to the family. However, the man reminded him that for a noble, Power should not be the only objective. Stunned by the revelation, the young man listened as the elder explained that every choice required a careful balance between maintaining power and ensuring the children's happiness. Determined to ensure his son's happiness, the man refused to let him go to a place where he would suffer. Stunned by this unexpected declaration, the young pair stood frozen in complete disbelief. Blushing and smiling, she closed her eyes, surprised by the possibility that her father was starting to treat him like a son, while the man quickly tried to explain himself to avoid a misunderstanding. Alicia remained unmarried solely because of Lord Goral's influence. Despite her beauty and high social standing making her a prime candidate for marriage, he consistently prioritized her personal happiness above all else. Bowing respectfully, he made it clear that he had no intention of returning to the Empire. After a brief hesitation, Goral offered to draft the refusal himself to ensure it carried more weight, earning him a word of thanks from the blacksmith. He remained convinced that the man in the Empire was being treated as nothing more than a disposable asset. Alicia interrupted her father, prompting him to ask what she needed from him. Accompanied by the blacksmith, the girl decided to use her attendance at the ball as an opportunity to deliver the letter in person. Her father couldn't understand why she was going through all this trouble, especially since she usually avoided these types of events, leaving him to question her true motives once again. Alicia had only received invitations because everyone assumed she was single, but she now had the perfect chance to reveal her fiancé to the world. Her words brought a flush to the young man's face. After considering his daughter's statement, the father turned to Faye and asked if he was in agreement. After he gave his confirmation, the man seemed satisfied. He felt that if Alicia was willing to attend the ball for this reason, then he certainly needed to be there, especially since he planned to announce the truth of their relationship to everyone. He agreed to draft the letter himself, instructing the others to prepare for their departure. Once they were alone, she initially thanked the bride but quickly reconsidered, deciding instead to present the letter publicly to address the sender's arrogant behavior. She was filled with indignation that the Empire had the audacity to look down on her husband. She ordered them back to their own workshop, leaving them consumed by envy at the realization that they could never claim a blacksmith of Faye's caliber for themselves. Alicia placed her hands on the groom's stomach, assuring him that those people would be disgraced once they realized he had officially joined the Barnasto house. He felt a deep sense of gratitude toward his bride, recognizing that he only stood by her side today because of everything she had done for him. Alicia felt flustered by his praise, privately disagreeing since she felt he had been just as instrumental in helping her. Ultimately, it was revealed that the girl's dream of happiness was simply to walk alongside Faye. The guy could only utter something unintelligible, but he thought about how, when it was revealed, Alicia began to talk more often about her feelings. Agreeing with him completely, she pulled him into a sudden embrace. As he returned the gesture, she caught him off guard with a confession of love. Stunned by the unexpected statement, the young man stood frozen, completely unsure of how to respond. As their eyes met, she felt a surge of happiness that quickly overshadowed her nerves. The young man looked at her with a smile, prompting Alicia to ask if his heart was truly racing just as wildly. The guy decided to joke back. If he became even happier, he simply risked tearing himself to pieces. Alicia burst out laughing. She was amused by the groom's words. Faye looked at her with loving eyes, thinking that before he could live alone, looking at other lovers. Though he once struggled to understand how they could spend so much time together, he now found every day with Alicia to be a source of genuine happiness. With the conversation concluded, they shifted their focus toward preparing for the journey ahead. Slamming his fist against the table in a fit of rage, the man began to tremble as his eyes fell upon the scattered opened letters. His impatience mounted as the silence persisted, making him wonder if they were actually bold enough to mock him. The boss felt deeply insulted by the blacksmith's silence, viewing the lack of a reply as a personal slight. He gripped the paper firmly, muttering that if the impostor was anywhere near Lady Alicia, he needed to respond immediately. Otherwise, he hoped the Barnasto house would at least grant him the recognition he was owed. He remembered reaching out to the other blacksmiths, recalling how he had to swallow his pride and beg for their return, an effort that successfully brought a few of them back. He had cast aside his dignity just to survive, yet they chose to ignore him completely, leaving without any intention of looking back. Crucially, the most significant one was a fake, and it appeared the commander might have been mistaken about the young man being a master blacksmith. Holding his face in his hands, he suddenly recalled a piece of information that might just improve his current predicament. Recalling his past, the son reached out to his father for help, knowing he wouldn't survive without his support, and desperately hoping he wouldn't be left to face his fate alone. His hopes were dashed when his father refused to intervene. By disowning him, the knight commander ensured he was no longer a member of the household. Despite having secured his position through family influence, he had squandered the opportunity, and was ultimately expelled from the guard. After bringing shames to his family, his standing in the household plummeted to that of a yard dog, leaving him fortunate to be exiled without being forced to pay for his failures. Through tears, Morgan begged his father for one last chance, but the decision was final. He was officially disowned and cast out of the family. Having lost his home and family, the boy was forced to take refuge where he could. His workplace soon met a similar end, and as the people there fled, their true identities remained a mystery. He was snapped back to reality by the sound of voices discussing the captured Lady Alicia and her fiancé, who was revealed to be an imposter. Struggling to accept the reality of the situation, the man was interrupted by a carriage pulling up as the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. Stepping out of the carriage, the couple gazed at the palace with a smile as the man reflected on how much time had passed since his last visit. The royal castle is bustling in preparation for the upcoming ball, with international nobles arriving as servants scurry in every direction to finalize the details. The situation stirred old memories within the man, and as they held hands more tightly, Alicia suggested they take a brief rest from the weariness of their long journey. With a room in the palace already prepared for him, the young man couldn't help but feel a bit of panic. According to what Leafy had told Faku, most of the nobility stayed there during the ball to avoid local inns and ensure a more comfortable visit to the empire. This time he appeared as a malicious fiancé, standing with the others in the center of a massive, luxuriously furnished room. Although they weren't officially married yet, the couple lived together and were already formally recognized as husband and wife, a realization that left them both visibly flustered. She cheerfully noted that they were finally sharing a room, while the impostor grew anxious and offered a hurried agreement. Recalling Mr. Goral's stern warning to avoid any reckless mistakes, the young man decided to play it safe and sleep on the sofa instead. In contrast, the bride was beaming with joy, asking the groom if he was happy. However, he was caught off guard and simply mirrored the question back to her. She then pulled him into a warm embrace, her eyes shining with delight as she looked at him. He was well aware of the happiness her presence brought him, yet he felt too self-conscious to ever put those feelings into words. The two remained in a silent embrace, simply holding one another. A knock sounded at the door as Leafy requested Alicia and Faku's permission to enter. Upon opening the door, the maid apologized for interrupting his rest. She presented a group of young people who were eager to offer their greetings to the couple. Faye quickly turned toward Alicia, who gave him her consent. He sheepishly asked if he should have accompanied her, but the bride sensed that he didn't truly want to go. The young man dismissed her worries, insisting that as her husband, it was now his duty to stay by her side. A long series of introductions followed as aristocrats arrived one after another, their faces filled with visible amazement. Their expressions momentarily twisted in shock, making it clear that the engagement rumors had already reached their ears. Several onlookers recognized Fike at his imperial forge, their expressions faltering as they struggled to maintain a facade of friendliness. The visible shock on everyone's faces made it clear that a commoner was the last person they expected Alicia to choose. As they drew near, the man opened the door and offered an apology to the girl. At that exact moment, the person entering was cut off mid-sentence as they both froze, staring at each other in pure shock. The boy stared at the man in pure horror, struggling to comprehend the situation and how they had ended up there. As his heart began to race uncontrollably, he instinctively clutched his chest, drawing a worried gaze from the girl. Clearly stunned, Morgan questioned her about why she had arrived at the ball alongside the blacksmith. Without a moment's hesitation, she clarified that the impostor was her fiancé. The man was left even more stunned by what he heard next. The man kept quiet until Morgan finally spoke, turning to the girl to address the requirement that she could only marry a master blacksmith. She confirmed his suspicions, explaining that this was exactly why the hero had become her fiancé. However, the man dismissed the youth as talentless and unoriginal, a sentiment she quickly rejected. To her, he was a master blacksmith whose exceptional skills had even earned the recognition of Lord Goral. A maid emerged behind her, carrying an envelope in her hand. She handed the letter to Morgan, revealing it was the Duke of Barnasto's response to his recent message. Fake's expression tightened further as the girl watched him with sorrow, his teeth baring in anger once he finished reading the letter. He suddenly erupted in anger, shouting at the man for refusing to return to the palace and for daring to be so insolent. Startled by the sudden reaction, the young man broke into a nervous sweat as the tension grew palpable. Morgan's piercing gaze sent a chill through the blacksmith, leaving him frozen and unable to utter a word. The young man struggled to regain his composure, realizing that since he no longer served the man before him, his former master's authority had completely vanished. Visions of the relentless cruelty Fake endured under Morgan's rule flooded back, proving that the trauma was still deeply rooted in his mind. The lingering agony of the past 3 years caused the young man to tremble uncontrollably, and though his voice failed him, He knew he had to pull himself together before he appeared any more pathetic. Alicia unexpectedly took his hand and intertwined her fingers with his, her gentle smile helping him finally settle his nerves. Realizing the bride was dedicated solely to saving him, Faye finally managed to pull himself together. Firmly rejecting his former superior, the hero made it clear he had no intention of returning to the palace, choosing instead to live out his days as a blacksmith and Alicia's husband. While the statement initially caught Morgan off guard, his fury quickly resurfaced, causing him to grit his teeth even tighter. Refusing to stay silent, she intervened. Though she couldn't understand his intense desire to return, as his fiancée, she was determined to keep him away from a place defined by bullying and injustice. Trembling from a surge of bitter resentment, the man reflected on how much he had sacrificed for the youth's sake. Driven by anger over the steep price, Morgan lunged at the boy to deliver a blow, but his fist was intercepted and held firmly. Seizing the moment, Faye pinned the man's arm behind his back and forced him onto the floor, effectively immobilizing him. He lashed out at the girl with insults, demanding she release him while fuming over the maid's blatant disrespect. Infuriated by Morgan's intent to harm her master, Faye warned him not to overlook Fake's ties to the Duke's family. Those who harbor ill intent toward the Duke of Barnasta will inevitably face the consequences of their actions. Trembling on the floor, Morgan crawled toward the boy, who visibly stiffened as he drew near. Suddenly, Morgan let out a loud howl, desperately trying to retract his earlier statements and confessing that they were all lies. He decided to be upfront, admitting that his standing at court was in jeopardy if the blacksmith failed to return. He hoped that the prestige of the court blacksmith title would also provide the boy with his own advantages. Alicia spoke up on the groom's behalf, explaining that they had no need for the title since her father had already discussed the matter and supported their decision. Morgan was still in tears when the sound of footsteps from above suddenly caught his attention. Faye reaffirmed his decision not to return, while also expressing his gratitude for the years they had shared together. In a desperate attempt to stop him from leaving, the farmer boss seized the young man's leg and continued to plead. He was prepared to grant any favor, yet the young man responded with irritation, asking only to be let go. Faye seized the man's arm, refusing to let him lay a hand on the master. She warned him that if he defied her again, she would be forced to report his behavior. Morgan's sobbing only intensified as her grief grew even more profound. As Morgan exited the room, Fate watched him in silence while his bride offered a smile. Finally letting out a sigh of relief, he was met with a supportive embrace from the girl, who praised his composure against his former boss while he thanked her for the encouragement. As the young man embraced his bride and shared his feelings, Morgan's sudden appearance caused him to tremble with fear. The sight triggered memories of his agonizing time in the Royal Forge, reminding him that he never could have escaped that place without Alicia's help. The girl recognized the hero's significant contributions, but the young man had reached a clear realization. He had no intention of returning to the palace, and though he knew the path ahead would be difficult, he was certain that he and Alicia could overcome any obstacle together. While trading on the city streets, Faye and his bride tallied their earnings after selling through their entire inventory for a total of 800,000 crowns. Although it was a successful day, their sales had plateaued recently, suggesting they had reached the current limit of their business. He realized that given their current efficiency and the grade of magic iron, raising prices was impossible. To increase sales, they would need higher quality materials, though he had yet to find a source. He considered asking Rig for guidance, but he questioned if it would even be helpful given their current situation. The total revenue had currently reached 830,000 crowns. Upon noticing the stagnant sales, the Duke received an apology from the young man, though such a gesture was entirely unnecessary. He retrieved the articles from the drawer and laid the papers on the table, asking Faye to examine them. Upon inspecting the interior, the boy questioned its purpose, prompting his father to clarify that the structure was originally a forge and came fully equipped with all the essential tools. With the property now listed for sale, the Duke sought the young man's perspective on the matter, but the boy completely failed to pick up on his subtle hints. Consequently, Girl approached him with a direct offer to establish his own workshop. Though this move would bolster his reputation and make sales easier, the hero grew uneasy as he thought back to his own workshop. As he tried to explain the necessity of learning noble etiquette, his father interrupted him, leaning in to ask if his true dream wasn't to become the greatest blacksmith in the world. Alicia shared the news with her father, but the Duke dismissed the concern, believing the man had likely abandoned his goal by now. Faye reassured his father that his dream remained the same, but more important priorities had since emerged, leaving Caral curious about what they were. Visibly embarrassed, the young man admitted his desire to become a husband worthy of Alicia. Believing her nobility and kindness made her far too good for him, He resolved to focus on his education so he could one day stand as her equal. Fearing that his appearance as a commoner would disgrace the girl, he was determined to prevent it from happening. The father stood with his mouth agape, clearly stunned by what he had just heard. Agreeing that the young man needed to master noble etiquette, the Duke revealed he had already secured a tutor for the task. He informed the hero that only the world's greatest blacksmith would be considered a worthy match for Alicia. Goro valued proper etiquette, but he believed that striving for excellence was far more vital, a philosophy he hoped to instill in Fate. Moved by the inspiring words, the young man eagerly gave his consent, much to the Duke's satisfaction. The father presented the blacksmith with a chest full of money, and though the young man felt too ashamed to accept it, the master insisted he open the lid and look inside. Following the instructions, he discovered the chest was filled with money, and Garl quickly reassured him that since he had earned nearly all of it himself, the small amount added was negligible. Since the young man was his daughter's fiancé, Garl's only wish was to see him become the finest blacksmith in the Barnasto household, a goal the pleasantly surprised youth promised to fulfill. 3 years ago, a somber Alicia rested her hand against the sofa, reflecting on the man's words when he spoke of his one true desire. He harbored a deep ambition to become the greatest blacksmith in the world. Whenever he spoke of his goal, his intense passion was unmistakable. The girl watched him, softly uttering his name to herself. She recalled him being roughly her age, perhaps slightly older, and vividly remembered the pure joy on his face as he shared his ambitions with her. Alicia noticed a peculiar sensation stirring within her, prompting her to instinctively place a hand against her collarbone. For reasons she couldn't explain, the girl found herself unable to forget his smile, feeling a strange yet pleasant warmth deep in her heart. Noticing her mistress acting out of character, the maid began to worry if something was wrong. Startled by Leafy's sudden appearance, Alicia asked her to stop sneaking up on her to avoid any future scares. Despite being called several times, the girl remained lost in her thoughts, leaving the servant concerned that something might be wrong. Visibly flustered after being caught, Alicia quickly brushed aside his suspicions and insisted that everything was under control. Wayfi remained deeply unsettled following the mistress's return from Revenald, as the woman's words seemed like nothing more than confusing nonsense to her. The maid chose to go last, and clearly hinted that she had met someone in the city, causing the aristocrat to grow anxious. Although an onlooker spotted them, she seemed completely oblivious to their presence. The young woman's pointed gaze only deepened the girl's growing sense of shame. The maid noted that the Duchess always seemed much more reflective after returning from her solitary walks. Alicia was struck by how sharp and quick-witted her companion proved to be. Choosing not to beat around the bush, she asked Alicia point-blank if she was truly in love, a blunt question that left the girl completely stunned and speechless. Despite the young lady's firm denials, her blushing face betrayed her, and the maid immediately saw through the act. Having looked after her mistress since birth, Leafy was quick to notice even the smallest changes in her. Trembling with intense embarrassment, the girl decided to speak, though she carefully avoided mentioning that she had fallen in love. To help her navigate her emotions, the maid asked if the young man was constantly on her mind, but Alicia remained uncertain about how she truly felt. Ultimately, the noblewoman admitted that he was constantly on her mind, though she struggled to determine if it was truly love, as she had never experienced such intense feelings or heartache before. After only a single brief meeting and a short conversation, the speed of these developments felt incredibly sudden. Liafa was overjoyed, as it seemed she had fallen in love the very moment they met. Startled by the maid's blunt phrasing, Alicia's face remained flushed as she was questioned about her true feelings for the young man, eventually giving a hesitant answer that she might actually like him. Recalling their conversation brought a genuine warmth to Alicia's heart, as his sincere smile felt truly inspiring. Ever since her mother's passing, her days had been nothing but empty and gray. Upon meeting the young man, she felt as though a missing part of her world had finally returned, while Leafy found herself saddened by the story she told. Despite everything, Alicia remained convinced that her feelings didn't necessarily mean she was in love. The maid provided her unwavering support, recognizing that these heartfelt feelings were truly significant. She was genuinely heartened to see that someone like him had finally entered the lady's life. Her servant encouraged her to give her feelings a chance if he truly mattered to her, suggesting that this spirited man might be the one to stand by her side and love her unconditionally. Alicia asked if the girl had ever been in love, causing her to pause and reflect before giving an answer. Lafine admitted she had no prior experience with the situation, catching the mistress off guard since the maid was actually older than her. She explained that she simply hadn't encountered a suitable partner yet. With their household almost entirely devoid of men, Leafy dedicated herself completely to caring for Elise, leaving no room for a personal life or romance. Seeing her master happy was enough to bring her peace, and together, they were content to simply sit with and acknowledge the emotions they shared. She recommended they speak with the young man during their next visit to Revenold to confirm whether these feelings were genuine. Encouraged by the prospect of their next encounter, she resolved to speak with him openly and thanked Leafy for her support, while the maid promised to eagerly await good news. Some time ago, Alicia was invited to return to Revenold, the same place where her impostor resided. Under normal circumstances, the girl despised attending formal balls and only ever went with great reluctance. A sense of relief washed over her, knowing she would finally reunite with the young man after their long time apart. Morgan approached the girl and offered her a polite greeting. She recognized him as the blacksmith from the workshop, recalling the formal greetings they had exchanged over family matters, though he was someone she would have preferred never to see again. When he gently asked why she had come to the palace, she told him about a blacksmith named Faye, who had recently entered the court's service, leaving Morgan visibly puzzled by the name. Worried the newcomer had made a mistake, he offered Lady Alicia a quick apology, but she reassured him that he'd done nothing wrong, explaining she simply wanted to welcome the shop's newest arrival. Realizing the situation, Morgan volunteered to escort the lady to the workshop where Faye was working. Upon their arrival, he gave a distinctive knock and announced his entrance before opening the door. As the young man was busy crafting a sword, several guests arrived, prompting him to ask his boss for instructions until he suddenly locked eyes with a girl standing among them. When he addressed her by name, the noblewoman was surprised that he had actually remembered it. Noticing something unusual, the man watched as she went to welcome the new customer, only to find a sense of familiarity between them. When he inquired about it, she clarified that they had encountered each other once before. Alicia feigned a moment of hesitation with the young man's name, even though she knew it perfectly well. He was flattered that someone like her actually remembered him, though an awkward tension soon settled between them. After observing them in silence, the lady thanked the chief for his company and dismissed him to his official duties, as she wished to speak with Sir Faye privately before departing. Morgan eventually agreed to her request, but the hostile glare he directed at the man left him feeling deeply unsettled. Before departing, the man placed a hand on the hero's shoulder under the guise of offering advice, but he secretly gripped her with a trembling, angry force that she found quite unsettling. Alicia was visibly shaken, prompting him to use her surname to maintain their formal facade. Feeling uncomfortable with his stiff demeanor after their initial introduction, she worked up the nerve to ask him to speak more casually, but he failed to grasp her request. She invited him to address her as Alicia, leaving the young man stunned that he was allowed such familiarity despite not being an aristocrat. The girl offered an apology, realizing she might have caused him some embarrassment, but the young man dismissed the idea, believing himself to be nothing more than an ordinary commoner. She admitted that because there were so few people her age in the palace, she hoped they could talk more often and perhaps even become friends, a request that left even her feeling surprised by her own boldness. The young man was initially speechless, leaving the girl anxious that he might decline, but Faye ultimately accepted and addressed her by name, clearly pleased with the opportunity. Genuinely surprised by his sudden agreement, Alicia apologized in case her request had come across as selfish, even though it was perfectly reasonable. To be certain, she asked once more if he truly wanted to be friends with her. Naturally, the man was pleased and wanted to express his gratitude to the aristocrat. Alicia then asked if he would return, provided she began visiting him regularly from that point on. Faye agreed with a smile, offering her an open invitation to visit whenever she wished. As he prepared to leave, the girl shyly offered her well wishes for his work. After they waved goodbye and went their separate ways, Alicia felt more determined than ever to get closer to the Faye. Upon arriving at the ball, she immediately hurried to the forge to see the young man. Though their initial conversation was stiff, the tension slowly melted away as they grew more comfortable with each other. She cherished every moment spent with the young man, finding that time always seemed to slip away too quickly. She wished their encounters would never end, as her feelings for him deepened with every conversation they shared. His carefully fabricated persona, from his voice and kindness to his supposed ambition of becoming the world's greatest blacksmith, deeply resonated with her. Gradually, Alicia began to fall for him, cherishing the unique qualities that only he possessed. During one of her routine visits to the workshop, she found him sitting despondently among a mess of swords scattered across the floor. She offered a greeting to the young man, but he met her words with a brief silence. Turning to face her with a stained face and messy clothes, the hero asked if she had come to visit again and apologized for his visible exhaustion. Alicia had long suspected that something was off, a feeling that had persisted for quite some time. Clearly worried, she questioned if he was all right, suspecting that an incident might have occurred back at the workshop. Attempting to deflect her attention, the hero claimed he was overwhelmed with work, which left him no choice but to stand before the guest in his dirt-stained uniform. Understanding his situation, she proposed they reschedule their visit for another time. Faye continued to tell her the same thing, but she could clearly sense his condition was worsening. Upon entering the workshop, Alicia found only Fake inside, initially considering herself lucky to have caught him alone. Upon reflection, she realized she had never actually seen anyone else working in the workshop. Day by day, she watched as the young man's health visibly deteriorated right before her eyes. His tattered and grime-covered clothes suggested he had been working at the forge tirelessly, without a moment's rest. Alicia was deeply troubled by the situation, feeling a heavy sense of sadness and concern. Faye reported her findings to her mistress, noting that a formal investigation wasn't even necessary. The man's exhausted appearance, isolation, and tattered clothing were clear indicators that he was suffering from the other blacksmith's mistreatment. Alicia agreed, realizing it was her only viable path, yet she remained deeply troubled by how to handle the aftermath. As a foreigner, she lacked the standing to exert any real influence over the situation. His only remaining option was to reveal the truth during the confrontation. And while the girl pondered the situation, the young man remained focused on his dream of becoming the world's greatest blacksmith. Revealing the truth about the bullying at court would likely result in his dismissal, forcing him to take a massive step back from his dream. Driven by his dream, Fake was willing to endure whatever was necessary to achieve success. Alicia grew desperate as the young man withdrew into himself, fearing that the hidden burdens gnawing at him would one day become too much to bear. Out of nowhere, the maid proposed a daring plan to rescue the young man. She suggested that the lady ask Fake to become her fiancé, a proposal that caught Alicia completely by surprise. Highlighting their nation's reputation for blacksmithing, Faye noted that the Bernasto estate was fully equipped for the craft, adding that Lord Gorel would surely support his daughter's ambitions if he were aware of them. The noblewoman realized that by becoming her fiancé, the young man's social standing would shift, requiring him to take on the responsibilities and refined etiquette expected of the ducal house. She worried that these distractions would pull his focus away from his goals, causing people to see him only as the Duke's future son-in-law rather than a talented blacksmith. Faye agreed, acknowledging that once he became her fiancé, his new responsibilities would make it much harder for him to focus on his personal interests. Alicia had overlooked the fact that Fake was a master blacksmith with an unyielding resolve. If the palace's inner circle couldn't break his resolve, then his new life as the Duke's son-in-law certainly won't shake him. When the maid questioned her feelings, Alicia admitted her love and expressed a sincere desire to support him in any way possible. Faye believed that the double would find much more happiness by remaining with her mistress. She suspected that the woman shared his feelings, which explained why he always prioritized spending time with her. Offering a gesture of support, the man took her hand and encouraged her to share her proposal, noting that he wouldn't be pressured if he chose to decline. Alicia felt heartened by Faye's conviction, as the maid couldn't fathom anyone ever turning down the chance to become Bernasto's fiancé. After considering the situation, she composed herself with a forced smile and thanked the servant for his assistance. Determined to approach the young man, she was confident she could make him happy and hoped to eventually have him as her husband. Smiling warmly, the maid offered the lady her best wishes for success. Upon reaching the palace, Alicia headed to the workshop, where she discovered the decoy lying on the floor, severely battered. Distressed by the bruises the blacksmith had heartlessly left on his face, she approached him and called out. As the girl placed her hand against the young man's forehead, he slowly opened his eyes. He suddenly leaped up, shouting about his failure to process the sword, only to stop short when he realized Lady Alicia was standing right in front of him. Fakes rested soundly within his private quarters at the Duke's estate. He was roused from his sleep by the girl's morning greeting. Gazing at his bride's sweet smile, he feared he was still dreaming in his room, but she had only come to wake him up and apologize for startling him. After coming to his senses, the young man returned her morning greeting, surprised to find he had slept for such a long time. Despite their official status as newlyweds, he felt quite nervous, especially since they were spending the night in separate bedrooms. She apologized for letting him sleep, noting how peaceful he looked, but he quickly reassured her and thanked her for coming before inquiring about the time. Alicia pointed out that it was only 7 in the morning, but since her father was eager to meet the hero, she suggested they go see him together. Hearing word of Lord Gorel, the hero bolted from his bed, realizing he had to act quickly to protect his bride and their now genuine relationship. When it came to marriage, every decision was left entirely in the hands of the parents. Faye chose to eat it to stay on good terms with his fiancé's father, making sure the man wouldn't consider calling off the engagement. Alicia stopped the young man, noticing his hair was a mess and wanting to help him tidy it up. Approaching the mirror, the young man noticed his hair was in complete disarray and realized he needed to fix the mess immediately. He began to worry about the Duke's judgment, imagining the man would never entrust his daughter to someone he viewed as a slob. Calling out to the groom, the girl offered her assistance and invited him to take a seat, having already prepared a comb and some water. She carefully combed and styled his hair, her movements filled with a gentle and attentive touch. Fake felt compelled to apologize for the trouble he'd caused, though Alicia brushed it off, viewing the maintenance of his reputation as one of her core duties as his bride-to-be. He asked if she truly felt that way, clearly delighted as a blush spread across his face. The bride playfully poked his cheek, laughing at his bright, flushed face. Mirroring her movements, the hero noticed Alicia's face was flushed, causing her to offer a flustered explanation. As Fake pointed to her ears, which had turned a deep shade of red, he wondered if his future wife was truly that embarrassed, noting how soft her cheeks felt. Visibly offended, Alicia threatened to stop helping him with his hair if the teasing continued, leading the boy to joke that such a punishment was far too severe. He admitted that having someone help with his hair was a new experience for him, which felt quite unusual. This surprised the girl, as she was used to servants handling her grooming, a standard practice among nobles that the young man realized he should probably start adopting as well. Alicia puffed out her cheeks in frustration, clearly dissatisfied with the arrangement as she had wanted to handle the styling herself. Surprised by her determination, Fake asked if she was truly ready to commit to such a demanding daily routine. She began to reprimand the groom, frustrated by his narrow-mindedness and his inability to grasp her true intentions. After confessing her deep feelings for the young man, she expressed a sincere desire to support him in any way she could. For her, catching a glimpse of his messy bedhead and sleepy morning face was the ultimate reward. Alicia suddenly realized he was opposed to the idea, making her see how selfish she had been, and that he likely wasn't fond of the charade. Overwhelmed with embarrassment, the hero's face turned a deeper shade of red as he finally managed to voice how much he appreciated her kindness. Clutching his knees, Pride joyfully announced that the decision had finally been made. Overwhelmed with panic, the hero worried his heart wouldn't be able to handle her constant kindness if she continued to visit him every morning. Until recently, the boy never imagined they would truly become husband and wife, and the reality of it all felt like a surreal dream. However, he couldn't afford to relax just yet. He knew he had to push himself further, striving to become the world's greatest blacksmith to prove he was truly worthy of Alicia. After she finished styling her hair, the young man complimented her on the impressive result. Noticing his hair was still damp, she reminded him to use wind magic to dry it off. The woman then retrieved a fresh set of clothes from the chair and handed them to the groom. Alicia's cheerful mood vanished instantly when he asked her to wait outside the room while he changed clothes. She fled the room in embarrassment, slamming the door and apologizing for the absurdity as the young man pondered if this chaotic routine would become his new normal. Upon entering the hall where the Duke awaited, the young man offered a greeting and apologized for their tardiness, leading his father to inquire about the cause of their delay. Faye stepped out from behind the door and betrayed them by exposing the flirtatious behavior they shared during the period of mourning. The couple turned back in confusion, only to find that the girl had already vanished from sight. Surprised by their early arrival, Girl offered an apology for the inconvenience, only to be struck by a sudden realization. Terrified by the potential implications of their flirting, the Lord looked toward Fake, who had promised to stay out of trouble. The group quickly cleared up the misunderstanding, explaining that he had misread the situation. Alicia was simply helping the young man comb his hair after he woke up. After composing himself, the father reached out early in the morning, wanting to speak with him before heading out for the day's business. He turned to Fika, inquiring if he still intended to pursue an aristocratic education. With the palace's affairs finally settled during the ball, the hero eagerly reaffirmed his wish. That day, the young man suffered a complete humiliation. From basic greetings to formal dancing, his lack of etiquette resulted in a total disaster. It was a predictable failure, as he had spent his entire life as a commoner far from the palace. However, he could no longer run from his new reality. He needed to master the fundamentals of nobility. Gorel felt no need to rush, knowing that making a public appearance would only lead to an immediate increase in his responsibilities. Unwilling to compromise, the hero refused to take any action that might bring dishonor to Alicia or the Lord. With that settled, the father decided to leave the situation in the hands of Alicia and Leafy. Given their high level of competence, Fake finds it much more convenient to study alongside his close companions during his downtime. Alicia was delighted, as they would finally have the chance to spend time together and focus on their studies. Fake had no objections to the arrangement and expressed his gratitude to his father-in-law. His father cautioned him against overexerting himself, reminding him to stay focused on his primary responsibilities. The young blacksmith simply nodded, once again agreeing with his father's words. Shifting the conversation toward more pressing concerns, Laura presented a small book she was holding. He handed the item to Fake as they discussed the purchase of the shop, signaling that it was finally time for him to find a new place to live. He presented several options, allowing them to choose whichever one they preferred. The young man suddenly realized that they still hadn't settled on a time or location for the workshop's opening. Alicia and Faye carefully surveyed the wide variety of choices laid out before them. One building in particular caught the man's attention due to its incredibly low price, though the Lord's expression shifted strangely the moment the group showed interest in it. She ultimately chose a location on the Street of Adventurers, as the price was 3 times lower than any of the other options. The property featured more than just a storefront, as it included a full forge and integrated living quarters. While other facilities also offered forges, they were often cramped, poorly equipped, or inconveniently located, leaving them all in the shadow of this superior shop. Believing him to be the perfect choice, the father confirmed the young man's decision as the Duke finally regained his senses. Goral added it to the list as requested, though he made it clear he wouldn't recommend that particular option. Alicia questioned her father, seeking to understand the reasoning behind his specific point of view. While the term seemed ideal, the suspicious price point made it clear that there was a hidden catch. Goral spoke with complete sincerity, revealing that a ghost actually inhabited the place. Feeling bewildered, the hero asked his father-in-law to clarify exactly what he meant. While the girl trembled at the mention of the ghost, the young man was left even more stunned by the man's claims. Had he mentioned monsters, it might have been credible, but ghosts were considered a complete impossibility. Both the previous owner and his predecessor had quickly fled the property, driven away by the ghosts that haunted the grounds. Rumor had it that a blacksmith had once died there, but the young man dismissed such stories as mere superstition. The lingering spirit of the deceased continued to haunt the workshop, which is why the Duke remained firmly against this option. Gripped by fear and frustration, Alicia lashed out at her father for suggesting such a dismal location, but Goral stood his ground, justifying the choice by highlighting the superior equipment available and insisting on showing it to her. Fake honestly admitted that the situation didn't bother him, as he simply didn't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. The bride, however, was deeply embarrassed, nearly reaching the point of hysteria. Despite her distress, this remained her best path forward, especially since the rumors might have been completely fabricated. Meanwhile, the man questioned why the previous owners had walked away from the store, though he considered the possibility that it was all just a simple coincidence. Passing up this property over trivial ghost stories would be a mistake, especially given its prime location. Even on the outskirts of the Adventurers District, it remains an ideal place for business. Opening a workshop here would mean a steady stream of potential clients passing by. Fake aimed to become the world's premier blacksmith and a husband worthy of Alicia, though he knew his current failing shop wouldn't lead him to greatness. To turn his ambitions into reality, he needed a new base of operations, and this location was the perfect fit. Noticing the fear on his family's faces, the young man realized that pressuring them any further would be pointless. He suggested they browse the shop first before making their final decision. When the Lord questioned if he was truly unafraid, the young man stood his ground, explaining that while a spectral monster might be a challenge, a common ghost posed no real threat. Ghost monsters and true ghosts are distinct entities. While demons can be vanquished, ghosts are fundamentally invincible. Although rumors of spirits occasionally surfaced, they were always unreliable, leaving him without a clear understanding of the situation. Goral gave his full consent to the arrangement, accepting the keys and the freedom to choose whichever option he preferred. After accepting the bundle and thanking his father, their conversation concluded, leaving the man to go about his work. Satisfied now that he had a plan for the day, he suggested his bride head out to browse the shops in person. Alicia hesitated, leading the young man to assume she was reluctant, though her true concern was the house where the ghost resided. He concluded that the others needed to see it for themselves as well. He was taken aback by just how terrified the bride seemed. He silently noted that she was actually quite cute. The hero proposed heading out alone, but despite her fear, Alicia refused to be left behind and insisted on accompanying him. As they prepared to manage the shop together, she resolved to stay strong and steadfast, fully embracing her future role as a blacksmith's wife even before their official marriage. With a kind expression, the hero invited her to join his quest, reassuring her that she had nothing to fear as long as he was by her side. Accompanied by Faye and the knights, the couple officially began their journey. The townspeople watched the procession with curiosity, recognizing Lady Alicia and her fiancé. While she carried herself with a mix of confidence and feigned awkwardness, he was the young blacksmith who had recently become the talk of the town. The woman greeted the noblewoman, offering a polite compliment on her elegant appearance. Unaccustomed to the constant attention, the boy realized that such scrutiny was simply part of his life as a nobleman. To begin with, the young man wanted to evaluate their primary candidate, but back at that cursed location, the girl irritably questioned if he was still so focused on the man. Faye was drawn in by the unbeatable conditions, especially since he never expected to find a workshop in Kiev that actually fit his budget. Alicia had been genuinely happy with the location until she heard rumors of a ghost. If they could just ensure the shop was safe, she would likely feel at ease, especially since she hadn't grown up with much. The lady questioned her maid about the ghost's existence, only to find that she shared her skepticism despite the unsettling rumors surrounding the area. Beyond the typical ghost stories, it was rumored that the home's residents had lost their sanity, and the unsettling sound of metal could be heard echoing throughout the night. As prepared food began to vanish, strange rumors circulated among the people, though many of these stories were likely just fiction. The maid cautioned against purchasing the property until they could verify the rumors, believing it was far too risky to proceed otherwise. Feigning interest in her words, he privately wondered if the situation was truly as terrifying as everyone claimed. Upon reaching their destination, they found the massive structure before them to be far more imposing than any drawing had depicted. Alicia sensed something sinister about the place, yet the shop appeared quite ordinary, its weathered exterior lending it the rustic charm of an old workshop. Trembling with fear, she found it impossible to even look at him, leading the others to suggest she wait outside. Alicia held on to the young man and asked for his protection, resolving to endure the situation as Faye laughed at their behavior. The knights chose to wait outside, though they were to be summoned immediately if any danger arose. As the group stepped inside, they found the room shrouded in darkness and echoing with strange noises. The Faye and Alicia were gripped by fear as the creaking intensified, and the sound of approaching footsteps became unmistakable. As someone descended the stairs calling out for Alicia, they finally came into full view and spotted the young man, leading to a moment of mutual recognition. It was rigged. An unexpected acquaintance was stunned to discover that the prospective building buyer was actually a fraud. Everything finally clicked for him. Although the name had sounded familiar before, the association with the Banished house address made this realization entirely unexpected. The buyer was revealed to be Mr. Fake, and the young man was taken aback by the sudden, respectful tone used toward him. He hadn't expected such a shift in etiquette, but it seemed their difference in social standing demanded it, reflecting the typical upbringing of an aristocrat. Rieg was revealed to be the merchant who owned the building. He expressed a unique sense of gratitude toward the hero's companions. The identity of the masked girl was finally revealed as Lady Alicia. She then confirmed that the young man was indeed her fiancé. Recalling their negotiation over the price, an acquaintance remembered the visible mix of tension and excitement on the hero's face. He immediately removed his hat and bowed to ask for forgiveness, realizing his earlier rudeness was a result of being unaware of their relationship. They told him to raise his head as the girl explained they were the ones concealing their true statuses, noting that if he still hadn't figured it out, her deception was a total success. After offering his support to the bride, the young man hoped to maintain their previous rapport, but the acquaintance declined the offer despite appreciating the gesture. As the inspectors arrived, the young man immediately got to work, catching the buyers off guard by personally leading the tour since they hadn't expected him to be so hands-on. Rig was still in the middle of cleaning when the guests arrived earlier than expected, catching him completely off guard. They apologized for the surprise, explaining they were simply eager to see the shop in person, yet the man remained firm in his desire to be considered for the position. Driven by greed, they decided to place their full reliance on him. Getting straight to work, the young man pointed toward a nearby trading area where the shelves and equipment remained perfectly in place, creating a layout that was remarkably convenient for customers. The young man had assumed that simply purchasing the inventory would be enough to get his shop up and running immediately. Behind the counter sat the storeroom entrance, while a separate door opened into a hallway lined with several empty rooms. They eventually reached a set of massive double doors that led into the forge connected to the main building. While the entire area showed significant signs of age, the tools and equipment remained perfectly intact. Alicia was thrilled with the exceptional gear, noting that the previous owner must have been a dedicated blacksmith. As the stories suggest, the original owner of this building was a legendary blacksmith. Rig was genuinely surprised that a blacksmith of this caliber had managed to stay off his radar. His skills were widely considered equal to those of the Banished house founder, leading to a fierce rivalry that constantly elevated the quality of their work. Fake was caught off guard, surprised that his fiancé had any knowledge of the matter. The girl admitted she was aware of the situation, but avoided going into detail, noting only the rumors that he was mass-producing incredible weapons. Rig noted that the legendary blacksmith Bali's creations are exceptionally valuable and have endured to the present day, despite the notorious reputation surrounding them. In his final years, the master's dedication spiraled into a frantic obsession, causing Alicia to recall the cursed weapon. Regarding the history of the Bistella swords, they were widely feared as cursed weapons, and word of their dark reputation had even reached Fake. Whispers suggested these blades were lethal, having absorbed the deep-seated resentment of their creators and threatening to warp the minds of their wielders. The boy gestured toward a weapon hanging on the wall, identifying it as one of Bestel's creations. As Fake examined the blade, an odd sensation suddenly came over him, prompting Alicia to check on her fiancé. However, he quickly reassured her that nothing was wrong. A sharp pain suddenly flared in the young man's head, leaving him to wonder if he had only imagined the sensation. Observing the situation, Rig concluded that the blacksmith should probably reconsider buying the property. They questioned his reasoning, asking if he had also heard the rumors about ghosts. This story took place before the shop was purchased by its current owner, back when the previous blacksmith lost his mind and could no longer practice his craft. Fake was left in disbelief, questioning if any of this could be true. But even after the church was summoned and the saint inspected both the sword and the building, no explanation could be found. While magic can suppress a curse and a saint can purify it completely, many blades remain untouched, allowing their power to swell until only a master with an iron will can hope to control them. The boys examined the blade, wondering if it truly carried a curse, but Rig remained uncertain. Bastille had originally left the sword to be displayed there, and the king of that era, feeling a sense of obligation toward him, permitted it to stay. Still uncertain if the rumors and curses were true, the hero decided it was time to move upstairs and inspect the second-floor living quarters. Realizing that opening a workshop here would mean staying overnight, the young man noted the spacious interior and its wide range of amenities. Since the rooms were fully equipped and suitable for housing security, it was clearly the best option they had considered. As the inspection concluded, Reg asked Fake for his impressions of the building. Despite its questionable reputation, the actual conditions were excellent, and the young man was quite pleased with what he saw. However, since they still intended to explore other options, he asked for some time to consider the offer, and the seller agreed to wait for their final decision. Leaf stepped forward, offering to escort the young couple to their next destination. They continued their search through several more properties, finding that each had its own trade-offs. Some featured spacious forges but cramped storefronts, while others were the exact opposite. Even when the equipment was high quality or living quarters were included, many of the locations were simply too plain to be a serious option. He ultimately chose Bastile's workshop, as the other options felt like overpriced compromises that failed to inspire any confidence. Securing it required a specific set of conditions and a steep price, a combination that was only possible in that location due to its unique nature. The most discouraging factor was the location, as its distance from the bustling adventurer's street would make attracting customers a significant challenge. While a renowned master could easily overlook such an issue, it could prove to be a significant obstacle for an obscure blacksmith like him. Upon her return, the maid asked the young man if Bestel's workshop was still his favorite. He accepted the arrangement, but he remained curious to hear their perspective on the situation. Leaf recognized that the conditions were ideal if one could look past their prejudices, an opinion Alicia shared despite her lingering dread over the curse and the ghost of Bestel, while the maid also remained worried for their safety. In truth, he was quite curious to ask him about his experience working at the Enville. Ultimately, the master was a blacksmith of legend whose name continued to be revered in the present day. The girl began to panic, fearing that Fake might be injured, cursed, or even rendered unable to work, until Leafy suggested they research the history of the forge. Once the safety of the area was verified, Alicia was willing to give her consent, as she was determined to provide better working conditions for the groom's workshop. He thanked Alicia for her consideration, yet she had already taken it upon herself to handle everything for him. He headed straight to the forge, determined not to waste any time. As they neared the location, they realized the man standing there wasn't Sir Rig, much to Alicia's horror. The girl turned toward the guests, revealing herself to be Almay, and greeted Fate, whom they hadn't seen for a long time. Greeting his fiancé, she reflected on what her mentor had told her, still struggling to believe that the masked girl was actually Alicia. Feeling ashamed of her behavior, Alma offered a sincere apology for her inappropriate conduct. Alicia offered words of comfort, even as she secretly reflected on a past encounter that was far more serious than she let on.